So welcome everyone. Yep. And this is a Royal B effort on this one. So it's going to be a collaborative and interactive discussion forum. Elyssebeth, Stephen, and myself will try and put a bit of a framework around it. But really, the idea is to get as much engagement in this discussion as possible. But we've got a structure that we can work around to that end. The time, I mean, we're sort of, that's the schedule time, 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock. Our plan, as soon as you say this, it's not going to happen that way, but is to try and finish by 4:30, so we don't kill it. Having said that yesterday, anyway, we'll go there. So we'll try and keep it to there. Yeah, so that's just the housekeeping bit. And yeah, I think when you're not talking, go on mute. But when we get into the discussion sessions, which we will all the way through, feel free to leave your mic on, and just because the idea is to talk and engage. Acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia, recognize their continuing connection to land, waters, and community, and we pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So let's do quick introductions. Just so that everyone knows who we are, and if you've got audio problems, fine, just put it into the chat. By the way, everyone got the chat thing open? I just want to have lost mine now, so I'm going to try and find it and make sure we've got it somewhere so we can see it. And we can, ideally, we want to do this with your mics on, so just quickly, name, location, what you do, your affiliation, basically, what your experience might be in this context. Why you're thinking of attending, and if you're really game, something, a specific area of interest that you've got, and actually I want to sort of add, if you're really game, tell us something about you that no one knows, and see if you're brave enough to do that. So let's right, do we want to, how do we want, where do we want to, I'm trying to work out what the best way to do this is. So maybe we start at the top, and then we've got 3 slides to follow that will sort of just give you the background on each of us. So maybe we'll start with Andy, you're on the screen at the top for me. So maybe if you want to kick it off, I break the ice, tell us who you are.
Yeah, no problem. I'm Andy Bowd. I have a PhD in virtual reality and robotics. So I've got an academic background before jumping into the commercial world, but co-founded Immersive U in 2006. We basically have 2 products. One is for stitching together projectors for immersive displays. So a lot of big projection systems that you'll see out use our sort of software for that. And we also have an after action review product called VADA, which stands for Video Audio Data After Action Review. Hence my interest of being here today. We were acquired by a US defense company back in 2016. So we're on a lot of deployed programs in the US, NATO, UK, and here in Australia. And one of the things that I'd like to try and get from today is a lot of the stuff we do with our product is very technically orientated, but to me there's a human factors element to the training and making sure we're actually capturing the subject matter expert knowledge in the product. I sort of think of it more like we're creating a data lake, but we're not doing data mining as
love that phrase.
So, something that no one knows about me as I'm working from home, I play guitar. There you go.
Good on you, mate. Good on you. I'll have to show you something afterwards here, but anyway, let's keep going. Yes, good stuff. Thanks, Andy. I'm just working down the list, and so Alex, you're next on the list in the participants list. So do you want to have a quick bash at doing a quick intro, Alex?
Sure. So I'm Alex. I'm an emergency department consultant in New Zealand, and I work as a simulation lead here. So I probably run sims once or twice a week, and have been doing that for the last year. And before that was often a participant. And even though I'm running sims all the time, I still feel like I have good days with my debriefing and bad, and I'm just interested to get more ideas and perspectives for that. And I don't know what my thing I've never told anyone is. I might leave that one.
Well, we're all in Australia, Alex, so anything you tell us will be new for us.
Yeah. I'm Australian, so if I ever come home, I'll keep myself safe.
All right.
No worries. All right. Thanks, Alex. I'm just working down who's next. So we have Belinda next. Do you want to give it a crash with the mic, Belinda? See how you go.
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Belinda Olsen. So I'm a lecturer at Flinders University College of Medicine, teaching clinical skills and simulation. We do a lot of simulation there. So any skills to improve my debriefing or having clinicians come in that aren't skilled in that area, what's the best way to assist them would be really great. I've seen some things over the past few days which have been good. And also really interested in the transfer of what we're teaching. How do we measure that is actually being put into clinical practice? I find that's a really hard area to look at. So if anyone's got any good ideas of measuring that, that would be great. Oh, something about me. I've got 2 golden retrievers and I love motorbike riding.
Neat. Thanks, Belinda. Brilliant.
That's okay.
Yeah. Right. Let me just work down. Who have we got next? We got Jason next. How's your connection going, Jason? Oh, there we go. So we got something in the chat from Jason. Headset mic not working correctly. Yeah, seems to be the case, right? Australian Federal Police. 9 years learning specialist, expanding into simulated environments for training, desktop, mobile, and XR. Best player, there you go. We're getting a band forming, Andy. Just hanging there, Michael. Yes. Okay. Very good. Excellent. Thanks, Jason. Next on the list, just it keeps moving on me, but I think I've got it, Jason. Nanako, are you there? Can you do you want to have a quick introduction, please, if you could?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. My name is Nanako Iwasa, and I'm talking from Sapporo, Hokkaido, Japan. So, and I am a PhD researcher at Hokkaido University, and community practitioner for Ainu people, indigenous people of Japan. So my game experience is, and I am a simulation game developer. And so unfortunately, Elyssebeth has experienced my simulation game called Project Bhalla in Thailand in 2018. And Dr. Anjem Nawid has also experienced my game in 2016 in Simtech. Yeah. So, and my motivation is, so the title showed a debriefing theme. So a debriefing, and especially debriefing evaluation is very, very difficult. So, and I'd like to know how debriefing would be work for updating of the existing simulation game, and to stimulate for develop a new game. So my interest is about gaming, a simulation game, especially I don't play digital game. So, and I am very interested in analog, is an in-person workshop game. And so my interest is cooking. So yeah, I love cooking. So that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's brilliant. Thanks very much. Right. So where are we now? I think it's Daniela's next.
No.
Hi, Daniela. How's your audio working? Or?
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Yep.
Yes, we can.
Good. Yeah, so my name's Daniela. I'm a Senior Program Officer for the Health Education and Training Institute for New South Wales Health. My area of work is in allied health, and we're based in St Leonard, Sydney, Australia. So my role is to look at the training needs of allied health professionals across New South Wales Health, and simulation is one area of work that in postgraduate education there's a lot of interest and applicability in sort of teaching, I guess, certain skills for allied health. And I suppose I was involved in a program that delivered some family conferencing training, and we used simulation as part of that. And 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 it was and I must say I'm a novice in this area, so I'm here to learn. It sounded really interesting, this workshop, so I'm here to sort of absorb as much as I can from you all. But I suppose I was really interested when it came to debriefing in how to keep the debriefing aligned with what the learning objectives of the activity was, alongside meeting the needs of the participants as well, in terms of their individual learning, and also what had come out of the simulation, because every simulation or every activity that we had in that respect had a different focus, or something happened that needed to be addressed. But at the same time, we were really cognizant of keeping it on track in terms of trying to meet those learning objectives, and how that then translates into practice as well. So how that translates in terms of what they're actually doing in the workplace. So that was sort of my motivations for coming today. And personally, it's not that interesting really, but I've got 2 little kids, and I also speak German, so I'm bilingual. Not everyone knows that about me. So yeah, nice to meet you all. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks, Daniela.
Excellent, excellent. So next on the list, I think it's Tane. Is that have you? Yeah, I think it's Tane. If you want to have a go, Tane. So there you go.
Yeah, no worries. So I'm Tane Ryle. I'm coming from Ngunnawal country, so Canberra. I work both at University of Canberra as well as at Canberra Health Services. So I'm a physio by background, and I'm doing my PhD in the use of simulation to train and assess physio students. And so my experience in debriefing is both as a clinical educator when the students come out on placement, as well as part of the simulation that we've been doing as part of my PhD. And I guess my motivation for attending this session is because I'm a physio, we're trained to be problem solvers. So it's that trying not to jump in and problem solve for the participants, and actually getting them to lead the session, and I guess the feeling side of things, not so necessarily natural for me to encourage that side of the debriefing and things like that. Bit more of a practical person. And I guess the thing that people don't always know about me is that if I wasn't a physio, I'd be a rally car driver. That would be my dream job. Not sure how good I'd be at it, but yeah, I'd give it a go. And I guess if we're going to start a band, I could maybe bring some clarinet skills, but I haven't played for maybe 20 years, so I might be a little bit rusty.
You read my mind. Well done, Ted. Thanks. I was saying, where's the musical bit coming? Yes. Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Right. So I think if I'm
That's
not
everyone.
wrong, did Todd have a go, or did I miss Todd?
Oh no, Todd. Oh Todd. Oh dear.
Yeah, don't forget Todd.
Don't we dare not forget Todd. Speak up or write up.
You there, Todd?
Yes, she's probably typing away frantically in the chat because she had said she had.
We can't hear you, Todd. See, your mic's off, but can't hear you.
Yeah.
Unless you got to change the mic sourceware. That's probably could be the other thing too. You just got to click on the audio thing and maybe change to a different mic. It's probably going somewhere else.
Yeah, no stress, Todd. Would you like us to carry on?
Yeah, she says sound issues.
No problems, man. No problems. Okay.
Yeah. So let me tell you about Todd. Todd runs the big simulation equipment for New South Wales Heady. She doesn't drive the big Mack truck. They've got a driver for that, but she takes it all over New South Wales. It's the most extraordinary piece of equipment I've seen as a mobile simulation lab. And Todd's more than on top of the game in all sorts of ways. But I don't know any secrets about her. So if she's back online, she'll have to.
Yeah, it's a thing that the mic's not working. Maybe try plugging it in or something again.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So I think
we'll find out Todd's secrets later.
Yes, we didn't miss anyone, did we?
No, that's all of us now.
Okay, I'm gonna now jump in and do the team thing. So maybe Elyssebeth, do you want to quick give us a bit of a brief?
Okay, well, look, you can see there, I started using simulations in the 1970s. I learned about debriefing when it was management and communication games and only face-to-face analog. In fact, the idea of digital hadn't even been born yet, at least in my world. I'm particularly interested in facilitation skills. And what is it that people need to know and be able to do and rescue themselves from when they're running simulations. And for today's masterclass, I kind of wrote this little bit about saying to you, it's not going to be a tight session. Nothing is going to run smoothly. The three of us have had all sorts of uncertainties and issues around how do we best prepare for you. Because for each of us, a masterclass is a place where expertise works with expertise, yours and ours, so that we extend everybody's capabilities. We've got an amazing set of resources in the PPT that you'll get and we'll talk through. There's some activities, but the best resource is each other. So if you've got a question or an issue or a yes, but, I love yes, buts, even more do I like yes, ands, please speak up, because that's how we're going to collectively make it a masterclass. So that's me.
Thanks, Elyssebeth. Move on to Stephen.
Thanks, JB, and hi everyone. It's great to be here with you today. So some people may know me. I've worked in health care. My original discipline was nursing, but I've been in undergraduate education or university education now for about 12 to 15 years. And in that time, we've been working in a range of different disciplines across our Faculty of Health Sciences and in various different roles. Some of the things that I'm particularly interested in is around using simulation for, I think what its best purpose for is helping people learn really difficult concepts. So making really challenging things, experiencing them and helping understanding that way. I like the idea from a theoretical perspective of authentic learning and using and purposefully designing simulations, particularly for undergraduate students that practically, so contextually and processing wise, actually resemble what practice looks like in the workplace and have done a bit of work in that space. That's something that really excites me and interests me. I think looking at a couple of the comments that came through today, one of my focus areas is looking at designing simulations that do align learning outcomes, the activity and the debrief. So for undergraduates, that's pretty important if we're looking to change behaviour or develop skills and capabilities in areas such as clinical reasoning, empathy, resilience, emotional intelligence, those sorts of things. So helping people to develop the attributes that they require for their future profession. And that it takes some fairly conscious thought. So I'm quite really interested in that space. So I think on Tane's note about how to capture learning outcomes, how to make sure that we're meeting the learning outcomes of learners, as well as sort of addressing the other bits and pieces that come up. Very interested in that space, and also to Belinda's point around how to the issues that Belinda, I think, was alluding to are certainly those that we experience here. So, sorry, I work at ACU, Australian Catholic Uni. There's certainly the issues we experience here where we have a large number of staff teaching into our undergraduate programs who mostly may not have experienced teaching with simulation before. So, particularly dealing in higher education, we have the ambition to possibly requirement, but certainly the intent to deliver simulation and have a quality experience that's comparable between teachers, students, classes and campuses. And so that idea around and those challenges around trying to ensure some level of quality in delivery and facilitation is certainly very high on our agenda and on my agenda. So really, really looking forward to working with you this afternoon. Oh, one thing actually, just to go back, I want to make a new friend with Daniela because I started learning German and I really gave up when we got into the grammar bit because it just was beyond me. So I give you a call.
Yeah, do that.
The only German I know is the beer that comes from there is really good, and I got some of them. That's it.
Yeah, I was lucky I was raised with it, so I didn't have to sort of try too hard.
Yeah, no, it's great. I forgot to ask Elyssebeth too, and Stephen, I could come back if you want, but what's something about you that no one knows about? Do you want to think about that a bit, or have you got something to say right away? And I'll come back to Elyssebeth.
Oh, I think I covered it by saying I was learning German, but I'm really bad. So I know about that.
Okay.
Maybe people don't know that I was learning it, but it wouldn't take long to know that I'm bad at it.
All right, well, I'll stick with the languages and say I've been trying to learn Russian for the last few years, and yeah, I'm not good, but it's sort of a fun pastime.
I mean, having said that, you do your sabbaticals almost every year, or used to. I don't know if you're still doing it, where you go and teach in.
I have, yes, but it's always been in English.
Ah,
so, yeah. So no, I don't speak Russian well enough to teach it.
Right. Okay, so quick overview of my background. So as you will find out, or you haven't already, that the brain's trust from an after action review debriefing perspective here, clearly Stephen and Elyssebeth, in addition to everyone else that's on the session. So I've just used it a lot through my career, and so I'm coming at it more from a technological perspective, as well as lessons learned along the way in things that I've seen that work and things that don't work in that regard. So my background then has primarily been in aviation. Started off in aeronautical, and then sort of went into systems engineering and in modeling and simulation for the majority of my career, which was I think 24.5 years roughly with CAE, which in flight and modeling and simulation, that went from individual training into collective training, mission rehearsal, the fully connected stuff, and also then expanded sideways into data mining, healthcare, and a few other bits and pieces along the way. My passion really is in the sort of in spreading the word on what I think are the three pillars that underpin any competency set or anything we do pretty much in life, from a technology perspective to a human perspective, and that's systems thinking, modeling, and simulation. I think they really underpin everything we do. In that capacity, I've sort of been with Simulation Australasia, I think, not as long as Elyssebeth. I think, if I remember correctly, it was 2003 or 4 or something when I first sort of got on board in the SimTech conferences, and then we set up the Professional Development Committee, and convened 3 of these conferences, believe it or not, 2006 to 2009. So my qualifications are in aerospace engineering and computer science. I went on to do a master's in systems engineering, and I've just jumped in the deep end on a Australian Research Training Program scholarship to sort of try and put these concepts back into coming up with how do we assure and build in the integrity into artificial intelligence and apply that concept in that space. So big thing, but I'm trying to focus it down a bit specifically in a particular area. So that's me. One thing that you probably don't know about me, but should become obvious from the music thing, is that while I was at uni, and this is in the mid 80s, so I used to sing and play guitar in a rock and roll band in pubs and clubs, and we used to make $50 a night, which was pretty good in those days. I mean, it couldn't sustain a career after that, but with amazing times, and the beer was good too. So yeah,
I'd like to see a photo from that time.
I shall try and find one. No, maybe not find it now, but I'll show you something else that's proof in later on. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Right, here we go. So let's get started. So this is just make it, I guess, the base assumption over here, what Elyssebeth pointed out, right? So we're all learning over here, and I know that I'm going to be saying things that probably you'll think, what the hell did I come here for if he's going to say that? So I'm going to say stupid stuff, but but it's because I'm trying to learn as well. So let's appreciate that, and don't feel bad about whatever you sort of feel like saying, or what, where you've got to make a point. And then the corollary of that is that this really is a safe place, right? It's about sharing, challenges that we face, things that we've learned, and sharing things that we might then collectively, grow that understanding and that expansion. This is the structure that we, as Elyssebeth said, we have a structure. The structure will evolve, no doubt about it. But we've tried to break it down into 3 parts to span roughly the 3 hours and a bit. And the idea is that we want to sort of break it up into, a bit of maybe a few slides, and then we have a bit of a discussion, have a break, go on to the next topic, same sort of format. So a fractal pattern that will repeat. And the idea is that we're going to have 2 breaks in between, depending on how things go, at least. But if you ever do want to, you just want to break for a minute, if you want to get something done, or get a cup of coffee or something, feel free as well. That's fine. And then we'll bring it back at the end to try and summarize some of the key learnings that we've come up with. Did Stephen or Elyssebeth, do you want to add anything to the agenda, the fluidity aspect, or anything else you want to talk about in this context before we move on?
I always like the idea of the 19th century German military person who said, no plan survives first contact, and he said with the enemy. But these days, I think no plan survives first contact with the participants and the facilitator, or conversely, every simulation is stable until you add participants. So on that note, yeah, that's, yeah.
Great. Stephen, anything you want to add, mate? Okay, so I'm going to go into the first bit. And so the motivation. Elyssebeth, do you want to take this one, and I'll
Sure. I just wanted to check with Siobhan if she would like to just briefly introduce herself, just where you're from and what you're particularly interested in. If you can put your mic on. No? Okay, well, what I'll do, Siobhan, once you've settled, you're right, you can, mic on, you can talk. No, mic problems. Okay, what I'll do is I'm going to, I sent out this survey, and thank you very much to those people who responded. And although it does say on the original download sheet who did respond, I have no idea. So these are the things you want to takeaways on the left-hand side. Some of them I think we've prepared for, some we haven't. So this is where you jump in. The idea of the questionnaires to evaluate games learning and evaluating data in free description fields in post-questionnaires, certainly not my game. I don't do that, but it may be that one of the 3 of us or some of the other participants will be able to do that. And as we get into a conversation, whoever owns that question, if you're here, please make sure you ask it during the conversation. We can all throw in ideas and work with you on it. Second thing was how to avoid getting sidetracked. My instant answer is why avoid the sidetracks. Sometimes the sidetracks are the sources of the richest possible learning. So if you try to avoid them, it's implying there's a one right way in debriefing. And what I hope we show you this afternoon is that that's not the case. Definitely not the case. There are lots of different right ways. But the issue of how to see that the training was delivered has resulted in intended outcomes. Again, my answer is that occurs at least 3 levels. Immediately at the end of the activity, when you're doing the initial debriefing, back in the workplace, once they're starting to apply the skills, and then long term. With a colleague, Pip Lyndon James, we did a session recently on her experience of running a multiple mass casualty incident in 2013 for her students. When she checked in with one of the students who's now in London, and remember that's 10 years ago, the student wrote to her how important it was to have done that simulation because she got caught up in the London Bridge attack, and what she'd learned in the simulation came to the fore in that very unexpected moment. So you're looking for outcomes at least 3 points. And I always suggest people have a look at Kirkpatrick's model for that. And we didn't have it too much included. We can come back. Andy, this may go for you. It's about capturing information. How do you need to capture it? What is it that you need to capture? And who needs to capture it? The participants, the facilitator, the organizer, the manager of the sim. There is a whole heap of questions there. We hopefully get into some of those. And that transfer of knowledge question, 2 or 3 of you have raised that, so that's good. And then that issue of how do I know when I'm being a good debriefer? God, I wish I knew the answer to that. By the time I've written a book I have in train, I may have some answers. I think it's an endlessly variable task. So yeah, and it's important to improve debriefing, but it's a very difficult process. Next one, JB. And I can see Siobhan's replied in the chat, which is great. Really nice to meet you, Siobhan. Thanks for the introduction. And make sure you throw all your questions in. So the problems. When debriefing moves away from intended learning outcomes, it is a problem. But sometimes moving away from the intended learning outcomes is the only possibility to actually get the real learning. And that can be a paradox. If you've got an intended learning outcome and a real learning outcome begins to emerge, how do you balance those two? And I think there are three things here. You run out of time. Was it your management of the process that was at issue? How do you improve your pre-assessment that you've actually chosen the right assessment? Or how do you go back to the designer and tell them what was wrong with it? And managing the unexpected events. I offer facilitator resilience and expect the unexpected. When I first ran my first ever simulation conference, I called the conference Expect the Unanticipated, because I think that's what facilitators do, and hopefully what we're doing is going to take you through this. So a lot of the next things are open for discussion. The question about students being uncomfortable, and we talk about safe containers. One of the participants in this conference used a brilliant phrase the other day. She talked about safe transitions. And I think safe transitions are going to become much more important than safe containers. At best, containers are leaky. And if you have a hermetically sealed container, then the learning's not going to get out either. So you may as well go into your container knowing it's going to leak and focus on the transitions, transitioning in and transitioning out. So again, as we go through, we'll talk about that. And the issue of differing standards, it's a lifetime process of learning skills. And I've suggested resilient self-management. I talked about that on Tuesday. Can do it again here if people are interested. And the whole issue of having your own rescue and recovery options. So again, what we're looking at today, what Steve and JB and I have put together is a whole raft of resources about doing that self-management, resilience, self-recovery, building on the knowledge that you've got. And step one is always acknowledge that you're an expert. You are already an expert. What you're looking at is improving that expertise. JB, next one, finally. And why it's important? Well, my bottom line is there's no argument with any of these. It's never a uniform experience. But and for the designer somebody wrote the contents of the debriefing making my existing games updated and giving me new insights to develop a new game. I do not believe that you can give everybody everything in any simulation. It's much more important, I think, not to suggest debriefing questions or frameworks as such, but to encourage the facilitator to think through before they use the game what it is they want to do. So I think if you're looking at instructions for games, put a lot more effort into the briefing so that when you get to the debriefing, what we talk about here is then something you can rely on the facilitator of that game to have. I think if there's any other combinations, I do think that you've got those three levels: immediately, shortly after, and long term. Every debriefing process brings that out, and no matter how you figure it, it will never be the same for everyone. So thanks, JB. Well, before we go on, it's been a really quick trip through those. I don't know, because I didn't take a note, who posted those questions. If anybody's got questions or answers or comments, I'm happy to take them on or respond to them. If I missed anything you think's really important, hit me with it from anyone. Alex, your mic's on. Does that mean you want to pop up and ask something, or?
Nope, just means if I forgot to turn it off.
Oh, no, that's fine. You can leave it on. I just thought you
Yeah,
might, the little yellow box comes up. An alert. Okay. Well, we can always come back to that. And JB, back to you.
So it's come back up, and this one, so this is now to start to, given what we've all talked about now. So let's go back to first principles. Why is the concept of debriefing important? And we've got some material on it, but maybe we'll just have a quick roundtable of what do you think, why is debriefing important as in this mix of simulation? Thoughts? So maybe Elyssebeth, do you want to add anything to this question to start off the discussion?
Well, from the very first day I started with simulation, I've had it drummed into me by the very first person. You cannot run a game without a debriefing. You may as well go to bed without having breakfast. It's like it is a 3-part process. They're integral. It's like getting in the car and not having wheels on it. Yeah. So for me, it's essential.
Right. I see Jason's typed in the chat, achieving the learning outcomes. Right. So you're doing that to actually confirm that. Anyone else got any thoughts? Stephen, did you want to chime in with
No,
that?
I think Jason's point's a really good one. It's checking in to see, there's questions around evaluation and things, and it's checking in to see have people achieve the learning outcomes. Particularly in simulation, we run the risk of people demonstrating something and showing us stuff, but do they actually know? So can they actually do it in terms of competence and learning, and do they have the understanding, knowledge and understanding to actually demonstrate that they truly know what they do to the level that we want them to have?
Excellent. And who did someone jump in? Oh, Elyssebeth. Right.
It's just, I always question that learning outcomes. Because if you focus too much on the learning outcomes that were set, it may well be that you miss some wonderful learning that people take away and don't even know they learned. And why am I emphasizing this? It's a very painful experience I might talk about later.
Yeah, I think, it'll be good to come back to that one. And I just know Todd's got a comment. Guided reflection of performance against the learning outcomes. Yeah.
I agree.
Practice, yeah.
And I think that's a really nice point, because it's starting to make that connection that I think it was Daniela may have talked about in terms of the skills and the practice that we're trying to instill in people through a debrief. So, in terms of that guided reflection and that introduction to reflective practice, or helping foster reflective practitioners, and using debriefing as that vehicle or the medium to actually help people engage in that process that we would like to then transfer into practice.
Yeah, and Belinda sort of just echoed exactly those sentiments in a sense, Stephen, in the chat there. So excellent. Right, I'm going to keep the ball rolling here. So I'll go on to, Elyssebeth, was there something you want to do here, or were we going to do that later on?
No, I guess that was the placeholder for the feedback. So,
all right, good. So I'm going to move on. So, as Elyssebeth pointed out, actually, when she was just commenting, so we have to put this first of all into the context of it's part of a three-act construct. So there typically is a brief, the simulation or the action, and then the debrief. And so we've got to remember that it's part of a bigger picture. You have to set the scene to start with in the briefing for the debrief to add value or to be ready to close the loop in that regard. I don't know if you want to add anything more on this, Elyssebeth.
No, keep going.
So I think it's just the contextual slide. So right, so if you think about debriefing and after action review, some of you probably heard of John Dewey, sort of massive name in this space. And he talked about, he made the point, we do not learn from experience. We learn from reflecting on experience. So it's not just about doing, but it's about doing and then reflecting. And so what he was sort of alluding to then is this concept of reflection. And so reflection clearly has a lot to do with this debriefing thing. So if we just sort of ponder a bit and try and understand, so what is this reflection? What are the connotations that reflection brings into this? And this is my sort of very simplistic view of this, is trying to remember when I first learned to drive, and this was when we had manual cars and changing the gears and trying to do 3-point turns on a slope where you had to think backwards, and actually went backwards into a drain once, so really embarrassing. But that's the type of thing that's happening. So what's happening is, we're really trying to get a concept that was alien to us, and we somehow need to get that concept in, and it's not always that easy. And sometimes it can be unpleasant and discouraging or embarrassing, as it was in my case. And sometimes it can take a long time to get these concepts across. But what we do know is that over time, we get there. I mean, I did get my license, and I must admit I'm a pretty good driver now, but the first days were fun and games, especially in the old manual days. And it's, I don't think, that's going to come back now. Everyone's going automatic, but yeah. But if you think about it, so what's happening is when I was trying to learn to drive, I was in this new state where there was something new about the context I was in. And I was trying to establish the model in my brain of what I needed to connect to, what things needed to happen, so that I could build up a mental model that then could drive, the coordination through my limbs, my muscles, what I was seeing, what I was feeling, what I was doing, to be able to coordinate that to do the right thing. And to do that progressively, so that gradually this thing that I was trying to do would become second nature to me. It would be just as I learned to walk, and now I can walk, just as I learned to ride a bike, and now I can ride a bike, and to drive. And so what we're establishing or trying to do is to really get this concept of these connections that need to be made. Connections into concepts in their own right, connections into doing things a certain way, so that we understand what the right connections are and what the wrong corrections are, so that we can then correct them. And that's what this whole thing about experiential learning is really all about, that John Dewey was sort of alluding to. And he went on to, and then there was Kolb that came along and sort of took it the next step. And again, I'm sure some of you have come across this before. In fact, all of you probably come across Kolb's learning cycle, where he sort of breaks it down into experiencing, reflecting, thinking, and acting. In broad terms, he's talking about experiencing is about concrete practice, about touching, feeling, doing actually, and so you start to experience this stuff. But as John Dewey said, that's not enough. And so there's this concept of, once you've done it, you then have to reflect on what you did, how you did, whether you did it right, you did it wrong. And then as you're doing that reflection through thinking gives you understanding. So we're going, from the what you're doing, you reflect on how you did it, and now you're translating that into why you did what you did, right? In terms of the what, how, and changing it into the why. And through that construct, you have a mental model of what the world is. You've now done something, you reflected on that, and what you're attempting to do is to change. So how do I now change this mental model of what the world is as a result of what I've just done, and go back into that cycle again, so that I can then confirm what I think it should be, and the cycle continues. And this is the learning cycle that David Cobb essentially came up with, and it was the mid-80s. And before I go off this, Stephen or Elyssebeth, you're probably a lot closer to this than me. Did you want to comment on this, or anyone else want to jump in on the Cobb learning cycle from your perspective?
Nanako's put what she's saying about is, in simulations, it's learning by playing games. Nice phrase. I really like that. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. The fun concepts are there. Sorry, go on, Elyssebeth.
Yeah. I just wanted to check. Kolb's learning cycle does come in for some criticism. I went online not so long ago and found that there's a website that lists 100 different approaches to learning models, cycles, etc. Kolb's is used very extensively across anybody doing experiential learning or simulation. But if you've got some problems with it, let me know. Theoretically, the challenge is usually around what he called in his original work the pragmatic. So active, reflective, and theory, everybody accepts, but some people would say that he put in the pragmatic just to make it a nice balance, 4-point box for his questionnaire. I guess my point is, I don't really care. I don't believe he did that. But if that's how people want to look at it, then that's fine. This version, the issue about repetition, I think is particularly important. That you experience, think, theorize, and then act and practice again. And that's where simulation can be so useful. So, yeah.
Sorry, someone want to say something there? I thought I heard you. No? No. Stephen, did you want to add anything there or keep going? Yep. Right. So if we look at this learning cycle, there are two axes that brings out in particular, right? There's the vertical, north-south, and the east-west axis. And if you look at the north-south, it sort of separates out from the feeling and the thinking. So the concrete, the experiencing it is about the feeling it, actually doing the thing. And then at the other end of it is the conceptualization, is where you're looking at that mental model that you have of the world prior to this activity. You've done the activity, you've reflected, and now you're thinking about what needs to change in that mental model. What connections do I need to establish that didn't exist before, or what connections did I have that this has now shown me that I need to relook at the world is different. There's something else, or there's some new insight that I've got on this. So that's that vertical axis. And then the east-west line is about the doing and the watching. The concept being that the watching is the reflection that happens while you're thinking about what you just went through. And then the active experimentation in the doing is to then translate that into what will I do differently, is changing the paradigm into that construct. And in that vein, there's a bit more clarification that comes into this, that the point about you have to learn something, you have to do it by yourself. What's that famous saying? I see whatever, and when I do, I actually understand, and I can never get the words right, but it's a pretty strong one that sort of highlights the fact that you have to do somewhere in the cycle. You have to do to be able to understand. It's only when you do that things sort of evolve. Then there's a reflection.
I hear and I forget. It goes, I hear and I forget.
Yes.
I see and I understand, and I see and I remember, but I do and I understand.
That's it. Thanks, Elizabeth. Well done. Yeah, I'm on early stages of Alzheimer's happening here. Thank you.
Alzheimer's.
Yeah, brilliant. The reflecting bit, taking a step back. So moving back now and observing what you've done to review what happened. Then fitting that in with with the mental models that you have. How does it change? And then what will you now do differently based on what you've just learned? And so clearly the debriefing element sort of is starting to, you can see where this fits into this construct. And if I want to bring in one other quick perspective into this is, I don't know if any of you here in the presentation on Connecting that did the other day before yesterday now. But if you think about how we learn, how we build up our mental models, we go from the data, information, knowledge, understanding to wisdom continuum. And so what this cycle also is doing is consolidating, the recognition of knowledge, the practicing that, and turning knowledge into wisdom at the end of the day. So you don't just know how to do things right, but you know how to do the right thing. So it's bringing those two concepts together and solidifying them in a cycle that goes that way. So in that context, the Coles also highlighted the fact that while we're going through this cycle, individuals inherently also are, are sort of biased towards a particular style, depending on their own makeup, the introverts, extroverts, or whatever their style might be. And he talks about these 4 styles that sort of fit into this cycle. So the diverging, the feeling, and the watching. So those who prefer this style, they see things from different perspectives. They prefer to watch than do. They collect information and use essentially their mental model as an imagination to solve the problems. They like working together in groups. They take feedback well, and typically are interested in different cultures and people and that type of stuff. So sitting there watching and feeling. So it's all about the emotions in this type of an individual. The one on the bottom right, the assimilating, thinking, and the watching. So see, we got the feeling and the thinking. So this is the thinking, and then we got the watching. So this sector is the thinking and the watching, and these are often people that are technical experts. The analytical type, software engineers, scientists. They prefer to read, to digest, and think things through. And I must admit, I'm a bit biased in this thing that, if someone asked me something on the fly to do some, I could get a bit flustered. I'd rather get the question, go away, work on it, and come back, with a pretty solid structure and approach to this is what I think it is. So that's that particular style. We come across over here to the converging. So this is then the doing and the and the thinking side of things. So these are also technical people, typically technical experts, but in contrast, they like to apply their knowledge hands-on as opposed to the others that might do it more in the mind sort of sense. So they're the ones that enjoy solving practical problems in a sense. And then finally, we get up the accommodating, the feeling and the doing, and they prefer learning through the doing. The real hands-on people, they prefer to use, they'd rather gut feel than read a manual about how to do stuff. Let's go and try it and then we'll work it out instead of getting the theory right to start with. And one other point I just wanted to make on this, and then maybe get Elyssebeth and Stephen to say something, is that, in the medical field in particular, and especially when we get to doctors and surgeons, so the model that used to exist, and actually does in a sense now too, was pretty much an apprenticeship model. You'd learn knowledge, then you'd sit with someone who would do the surgery and show you how to do it, then you'd do it and they'd watch you and they'd explain stuff, and then after that you went and did it in anger, so to speak, on, well, not in anger, but on real patients. And that model has been morphing over time, and now we're very much, modeling and simulation is taking it into a virtual construct, right? So we're trying to do all of this in simulation, and while the virtual construct is absolutely bloody amazing, right? I mean, you can do stuff that you could never do in a real construct because of limitations of what you could do in an apprenticeship type approach. It opens up a whole heap of possibilities. But there is also a danger, I think, of throwing the baby out with the bathwater here. I think there's a need for both, right? I think there's a need for, there's a value proposition that simulation brings in, but that apprenticeship bit, the bit about the confirming your knowledge and transforming it into wisdom that came by being with the specialist who actually had done this before and had built up these mental models of knowing what the right way to do things is, and not just about doing it right. I think there's probably a risk of that being lost in a sense, and that could end up in the longer term, to issues. But I'd like to get maybe Stephen to comment on this concept and any of those things you want to add, Stephen, in this construct.
I think particularly on your final point there, I think, JB, that whole idea of, I think the conundrum of losing the apprenticeship approach, or what actually fills that space, is an interesting one, particularly when we're designing simulations for undergraduate students. So are we designing simulations for students as students in their role? Is their future professional, or are we designing what is their role in the simulation as their future healthcare professional? Because, that could translate to potential problems when students go out on clinical placement and those sorts of things. So I think ultimately it comes down to design. You can design simulations to replicate how you want people to learn and what their roles would be in practice. And so regardless of the context, you can design it for that way. If you want people to need to take a back seat, then that comes down to, or be more of an observer and watch what's happening. You can design the simulation that way. If you want people to join in and you want, you have confederates or whatever the language is that you want to use in a simulation, that you bring people in to engage them. If you want them to step up and step into a role, it can be designed that way. And then you can talk about it and explore it in the debrief. So, I think that comes down to the need and just being very conscious of these things can be, these aspects of practice and these aspects of learning, these processes of learning, which comes very much down to Etienne Wenger's communities of practice model, which is an extension of what you're talking about. That was an extension of apprenticeships. Yeah, I think it's fantastic. I think it's a very exciting space to not forget, but to actually capitalize on.
Yeah. Elyssebeth, did you have a point or a couple of points you wanted to make on this one as well, before we move on?
I guess for me, I'm curious to hear from everyone as to whether this is sort of a new way of looking at it, a familiar way of looking at it with a new insights into it, or Tane, from you or Andy, anybody? Not to quote Ferris Bueller, but you'd love to hear from people.
I must admit, it's the first time that I've seen this, and it makes, you know, it makes conceptual sense. I'm sure, as you said, Elyssebeth, there's lots of different opposing views and modifications, but it certainly makes sense from my perspective.
Good. Can you see how it and where we're at will helps you in addressing sort of your interests or concerns, or so are we yet to get there?
I understand the concept. I think we're not quite yet to get there. Our issue is a sort of a technology provider.
Yeah.
There's a little bit more, how do we best talk to the subject matter experts or the instructors to make sure the technology and the instructors work together in the best possible outcome for the trainee and the participant.
Okay, so a model like this, so for you, Andy, a model like this is something that you can demonstrate your knowledge of, because trainers do often know this or something like it. But it then helps if you understand that the people that you're going to be providing, like the participants, will come from an overweighting of one of those four perspectives. So your divergers are going to feel a lot and want to watch, they're not going to be engaged. So what kinds of issues are you is the educator going to need to capture around that person's personal preferences compared to the converger who likes to think and do at the same time? So, you know, if you watch Jawahar, Steve and I, we're all very different personalities, and trying to capture us as people looked at through these lenses, it's helpful to know, for example, that on Kolb, I'm very much an accommodator and a converger. I will do, you know, I like to jump in. Mind you, I've got my journal open behind me, so these days I do a lot of reflection. But how are you going to capture my behavior if I'm the one forward on screen, for example? And how do you also capture the actual internal learnings of a diverger who's probably hanging off behind me thinking, oh, thank God Elyssebeth's saying it, I don't have to speak up. Exactly. To me, that's where this model becomes really useful for what you're doing.
Yeah, it is interesting.
And it brings in the role of the facilitator, you know, so importantly in that construct. I did note that Daniela, were you thinking that you wanted to make a point over there too? Feel free to jump in if you've got something to say. Good point, and I can see there's a couple of points in the chat too. That
I love Siobhan's comment. It's great. She says it helps understand why she finds it more frustrating and challenging to help others who have different styles, especially as a surgeon. Yes, I totally agree. And to me, this is really important. I am such an activist that on one occasion during a simulation program, I found myself putting on an abseiling outfit because I thought they just wanted to see it demonstrated. And then when the guy in charge said, righto, now off you go, I stepped back and said, hang on. Everybody else was a diverge of feel and watch. They knew whoever put the harness on was going to go over the side. This activist had no idea. It was an amazing learning moment for me to understand just how easy it is for me to step forward. And over time, I've learned to stand back a bit and also to help others step forward. Steve, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I think I just want to capture on something you said there. Whether you agree or disagree with these kinds of frameworks and seeing that we're talking about Kolb, especially if you're looking at learning styles or anything like that, whether you agree or disagree, that's okay.
Doesn't matter.
The thing is that the message really is ultimately that there is difference, and sometimes it's really helpful, although it's so obvious. It's so obvious that there is difference. Sometimes, particularly when we're talking about debriefing and facilitating conversations for people, because they're not comfortable to do. You know, it's not a comfortable experience to facilitate debriefing, and it's okay to feel uncomfortable as a facilitator. and sometimes we forget that not everyone thinks like us or you know, has the same knowledge as us or would do what we would do, despite how much we would like them to. And so just recognizing and validating that there is difference is a really, really helpful thing to keep at forefront of your mind.
Excellent.
And just for fun, I'm putting in the chat the lyrics for a song from My Fair Lady. Why can't a woman be more like a man? Because it's one of those songs that sets out the nature of difference so beautifully with a lot of fun. So thanks, Siobhan. That was a great comment.
Thanks, Elyssebeth. And Jason, good point too about the engagement experience, the design to engage and appropriately, you know, in terms of open or specific. Right, I'll keep moving, and so that just brings it back. But the highlight over here, right, the focus therefore from an after action and debrief is on that aspect of reflecting and thinking, right? So you've done the activity and now you're going to reflect and think so you can then expand your understanding and then correct and improve. And so in that context, what we're really talking about over here then is the experiential learning element that we want to bring out. We're focusing on the reflection aspect. And as we've sort of said, you know, there's a number of dimensions to this. There's a framework which highlights how this works, but we need to factor in each individual that we're looking at in this construct. I need to have the technology that provides all of that information, which is where Andy's coming from. A framework within which to then use that information efficiently so that it's easy to get, it's quick to get, and effectively so that it's used appropriately, tweaked into the learning objectives as well as in terms of the types of people that we have. So we don't miss out on anyone, leave them behind. We bring them all along, and it needs that flexibility in terms of facilitation to make sure that does happen. And the more varied the group is, you know, the more challenging that becomes, and the more powerful the facilitator, the need for the facilitator. And maybe while we're going through this, think about the concept of one of the questions that came up. So how do I know that I've done the job right? You know, so it's about maybe using this framework as sort of a check reference architecture, you know. So, you know, have I thought about these things in the cycle, and have I considered the different types of people that are in the room? Have I classified them and confirmed that they've done their bit? The point that Jason was making, right, to actually, and again, about the continuous improvement aspect. Excellent. So that's the quick, I guess, overview of the motivation side of things. We have had a discussion on that, but I'm happy to, if there's anything more that we want to talk about contextualizing what we're trying to, our focus area for today in terms of this discussion. Any other thoughts anyone's got? Feel free to put your hand up, just say it or put it in the chat.
Hi, I've got a question.
Go for it, Linda.
Please.
Thanks. So with healthcare students, it could be medicine or nursing or whatever, you know, we all need to be able to speak up and think, be able to speak our thoughts and practice that. And as you can see, some types of learners find that very difficult, and they need to be able to practice that in a safe environment. So is the debrief that safe environment? You know, do we push those participants to be more involved or not in that debriefing time? Does that make sense?
Good question. Can I take that one, guys?
Go for it, Elyssebeth. I was going to, yeah, go for it. I think you've got the best place to go.
And you've got your hand up too, Steve.
Yeah.
Look, over the years, I've tried lots of different things. One of the things I find really helpful now is that for those people, what I understand about people who are not like me is that it takes some time to frame their thinking, to sort out the balance of how they're going to present their words, to position themselves in the right place. And I'm already past and gone, which can be frustrating and annoying for them. So I'll do a number of things. If it's appropriate, I'll ask people to write for 5 minutes before we go into a debriefing. That way it helps them to have framed their thoughts and ideas so that when the point comes they want to speak up, they've already thought about it. On one occasion, I was working with a group of men who believed they had no feelings. We're tough guys. but they were in a really, really uncomfortable job. It was called field officer, and they were out there chasing so-called dole sheets a long time ago. The role is still there, the process is still there, and they could not for the life of them express emotions. So, but one of them used in a feeling word in a different context. Didn't know he'd used a feeling word, but he did, and I wrote it up on the board. And what I then did was put about 3 or 4 more feeling words up, and what happened was they had this amazing conversation with the whiteboard, like it says on the board, and they'd pick a feeling word out. Oh yes, and look on the board, and so I put the emotions which they couldn't express up on the whiteboard, and then it was kind of like what squash, you bounce the ball off the wall. So there's 2 ways. And sometimes my son, who's very reflective, reminded me, he was in a class, he was the sole male in a class of 30. All the others were mothers returning to work. They were doing library studies. He was at the beginning of his career, about 18 years old. And at the end of this class, where they would spend 2 hours developing resumes for returning to work, the lecturer suddenly realized he was there and said, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry, Michael, this won't be of interest to you at all." And he said, "That's fine. I've had a good time listening. And I've learned a lot." Sometimes that's all those reflective people need.
Yeah.
And you check in, are you okay? That's fine. Then if they say yes and their face says no, might be worth checking. But if they say yes and the face says yes, fine. Just let them go. Their learning's happening in their heads. You don't have to pull it out. Fish hook's not required.
Yeah. Okay.
Steve?
Thank you.
Okay. Steve?
Steve, yeah.
Yeah, there's I think just reflecting on Elyssebeth's comments, there are some things I think in undergraduate ed that helps, or higher ed and TAFE, or any sort of education environment, is helping people understand how the game works. So how do we do this, and what does this look like? Because people from particular cohorts may not have ever engaged in activities like that before. So it's a little bit like sometimes writing an exam when starting the debrief. Well, you could run a simulation of a simulation to help people understand what it all involves, and explain it and debrief it so people understand what's going on and why are we using the type of questions, what's the reason for certain processes and those things, much like we've done already, going through the process of reflective learning, but actually helping them experience it, or giving them an experience of it and then analysing it. Some strategies, start off with the really simple things so people feel like they're able to answer questions, like writing an exam. Start off with the simple stuff, get into the more advanced stuff, and if you feel that people are drifting off then, or you're losing them, then go back to the simple things and hook them again and bring them back in. I love Elyssebeth's example of writing. So I'm one of those people, you go around in a circle and tell us something, and by the time, or you've got someone's having a discussion, by the time it gets to you, I'm so revved up, I've got something to say. By the time it gets to me, I've forgotten it, unless I write it down. I'm shocking at that. I'm so glad we don't have CD stores anymore, record stores, because I really, really wanted a record, and I'd go in there and then forget what it was as soon as I walked in. But the other parts, I think, are those issues around, so getting people to write something down to talk to, but then using post-it notes is great as well. Get people to write stuff up on a post-it note and they can put it up. It's anonymous. You can then talk about it. Again, Elyssebeth's point, it can be anonymous, so you can talk about it as a group, and you can debrief on that. And chances are, if you're getting it wrong, you know what it's like. You've written something down, you've got a point to make, and the person who's facilitating the conversation or the group don't get it. They're missing the point. Chances are people will start to then engage in that process, and just little by little people will come in. Using people's names might work, but if they're not inclined to talk, they probably still won't talk that much and might be shamed into it. So I think it's warming people into it.
And I think it's important to respect that. If they do not need to talk, then respect that for them, but check with them. There's a wonderful story told by an American psychologist who did a 3-day seminar on some of this work, and it's sitting in the front row the whole time was this bloke glowering and glum and almost, and he just thought, I've lost him. This is terrible. I really don't know what I've done. He worked his heart out and felt so despondent. And as the guy was walking out the door at the end of the 3 days, this bloke walked over and said, "Thank you. That was so valuable. You've changed my life." And you know, it's like there's this glowering face in front of him, but what was happening inside the individual was totally transforming. So you don't know. You just don't know sometimes.
Right, I'm gonna keep it going.
Yep.
We're almost. I think we're sort of close to tax. So so that was the motivation. I'm going to jump into what is and what is not now, the next topic, and then we'll probably have a break after that. So this is again to sow the seeds of the discussion to follow. Some views on what a debrief after action review is. And by the way, I just probably should have done this before. So we're using the terms debrief and after action review synonymously almost here in this regard. There are some people who consider them to be two different things, but in this context, we're pretty much giving them to be the same thing. They're the third act in the 3 series: the brief, conduct the exercise, and then the debrief or the after action review. But happy to have a discussion on that too if someone's got different, a different meaning for what these two terms mean, but we're using them synonymously in this context. So typically it's some sort of a structured approach. In defense, it's very structured, right? So there's a follow approach, and this is how we do it. And typically it's to look at these 4 things, and whether depending on which perspective you use, but typically it's to do these 4 things. Look at what happened, compare that to what was supposed to happen, understand why what happened, and then as a result of that, what are the takeaways? What do we need to do differently? What have we learned from this, and what will we do differently? So we're essentially seeking to understand what we started off with, the connections of what went right, what didn't go right, with the whole intent of this being to adjust our models of whatever those models might be, and at the heart of it, there are mental models, to adjust those and really to expand them from the learning activity, from the exercise that just happened, for something new or something different of how we then deal with the world and the situation we're in. And we're sort of confirming that through that cycle of the doing, the reflecting, the thinking about it, and how we're going to change it going forward. I think the term after action review was essentially something that came out of the defense construct, and in terms of their formality of this. And so it's really used by participants now across, domain. In fact, it's become universal. We talk about lessons learned in a sense, which really is the same thing. After every activity, after this event, for example, the ASC, there's got to be, in the CMOS construct, there will be a lessons learned. What after action review debrief will say, what went well, what didn't go so well, what did we learn, how can we improve on this going forward. And again, before I move off this slide, Elyssebeth, and Stephen, anything you want to add to this one?
Well, just that note right at the bottom on the right-hand side, that reflection and debriefing, whatever you want to call it, it is a way of building a culture of accountability, because the facilitator is accountable to the participants to check that the learning has come out the way it was intended, or that differences and unexpected things have been dealt for, but also in the organisation that there really is a process for ensuring that the learners have achieved something, even if not what you expected. So I quite like that concept of debriefing as part of that broader aspect of accountability for the learning. In standard classrooms, the accountability is often seen to be completed when the student's done the test. Mm. But that's not anywhere near as rich a feeling as you'll get from debriefing simulations.
And what a wonderful way to start advancing organisational or work culture, is to start with that accountability and building that people have the ability to own up to mistakes, to be able to explore them, understand them, and look to improve. And if that can translate to future practice, that would be a brilliant outcome. That's just so awesome.
Yeah.
Right. I'll move on to the next one. Yep. So this is now looking at the what is and what it's not at a very not superficial level, but at a very high level, really. but in broad terms, a after action review is the stuff on the left, right? So it's dynamic, it's, you know, candid, you know, say it like it is, safe place. We touched on that before. Focus on really, you know, what the exercise was all about, the event, the activity, the task at hand. Identify, you know, how to keep doing what we're doing well, but really to learn and to improve things that we didn't do too well. So, you know, consolidate those mental models and to grow them and expand them to get better at what we're doing. And the last bullet point over there, you know, really ideally you want to get everyone's input in, because by doing that you're collectively then improving the situation as well as individually improving the situation. You don't want people to be left behind, and that's the bit about the facilitation element of picking on those styles, you know, which making sure we sort of engage the individuals in the activity based on their particular style and not leaving them out of this. On the right hand side is, you know, on the top at least, is some of the things that we have to be cognizant of, that it sometimes tend to be used or abused. You know, it's not simply about just feedback, right? This is what you did wrong. You know, and it's not about critiquing complaints. It's not about, you know, writing a report of what actually happened in the whole event, and it's not you know, the be all end all of everything. And a lot of times, and I know I've seen this in the defense construct too, is that it sometimes, or a lot of times, it gets literally taken that way. You know, the lessons learned is just provide feedback. You know, this was wrong, you did that wrong, and you know, so we move on, but we don't actually learn. So the point to come back to every time is the question. I think maybe that I know that I've only started to realize and understand is what's the experiential learning that we want to achieve out of this, and is that learning actually happening, right? And that's really the framework. It needs to be supported, and when it's supported across the organization, you get more buy-in and people actually engage. And it's not because there are some instances where it can be read on, this is trying to find fault with who did the thing wrong, right? So that we can essentially, you know, demote them or get rid of them basically, or do something negative in that context. The other important factor is about the timing. You know, the longer you wait after the activity, you know, the vaguer it becomes, and you forget stuff. So it needs to be done very quickly and almost immediately, and you need to have this feeling of trust. It's about, you know, whatever you say over here is about learning and growing. It's about all of us growing together. It's not about, you know, bringing anyone, picking on anyone to critique it. Again, I put this back to Stephen and Elyssebeth really as the brains trust here to jump in and add your thoughts and comments.
Probably nothing from me, JB, right now, because I think we'll talk a little bit more as we go through, you know, as we have the conversations this afternoon. So I think this is a really nice summary slide at the minute, and we can refer back to it, I think, as we go to Savo. Indeed.
Actually, if you just hold your breath for a minute, Brett, because I'll get you to come and actually do that in the next slide. So just hold on for a second. Yeah. Elyssebeth, did you want anything on this one? Yeah.
No, keep going.
Excellent.
So
and,
Andy really likes that one. Yes.
Yeah, good, Andy. Good stuff. Excellent. Right. So now, Stephen, so if you could sort of summarize on this, because I think you really had the gist of it, and you've got some references there too, mate.
Yeah, I think this is just a summary, isn't it, really, of where we've been so far, and it leads nicely into the rest of the session after the break. Really, that there is what we've been looking at is in terms of a planned debrief, so something, or an AAR, we are intending that something is going to be occurring. We've got an idea of what the issues might be, particularly if it's a simulation that we've designed. So there is purpose to it, there is a structure to it, it is a process, it's not ad hoc necessarily. Well, there is a process, because Elyssebeth pointed that out at the start. There is a pre-simulation brief, there is a activity, and there's a debrief, and there is a structure to that as well, which we'll talk about a little bit. It utilises methods of facilitator feedback, peer feedback, and it can also be self-directed. So there's a number of ways that we can engage this, each of which have pros and cons and certain conditions or considerations before we implement them. But it isn't a one size fits all, and it can meet various learning needs, various learning styles, various contexts. But basically what we're trying to do with debriefing and a facilitated conversation is to help people self-identify their gaps in their understanding, in their skills or their knowledge, and also in the actions that they took, and to think about those, consider those, and consider alternatives. And that's the part that I love about simulation, is that you can provide those opportunities for people to try out, understand, discuss, think about alternatives. And sometimes, depending on your simulation design, you can get people to actually implement alternatives and see what the outcomes of those are. So what the consequences are of people's actions and the way of doing certain things. Ultimately, we're looking at transformative learning. So we want, and this is why it's uncomfortable for a lot of people, because we're taking people on a journey that we're exploring their own perceptions, their own knowledge, their own attributes, I guess, and styles. And we could possibly be exploring and analysing some of those with the view to making some changes. And we don't like that as adults. And so, you know, we are actually looking at transformative learning here, where people are assimilating and accommodating learning and trying to translate that to future situations. Because if we don't then help people make sense of what it is that's happening here, understanding what they can do to make changes if the changes are required, as well as maintaining what's working really well, then the translation to future practice or future situations probably isn't going to help. And in JB's case, he'd still be reversing into a gutter. And so, you know, which he may well be doing, I don't know, but you know, that's the outcome really of unsuccessful reflective learning.
Thanks, Stephen. And by the way, the car, defending myself here, because the car that I learned to drive on was a Willie's Jeep, right? One of those.
Oh my God!
Right.
Yes.
So it was some sympathy there by in order.
It's okay, JB. This is a safe space. It's okay.
Thanks, mate. I appreciate it. Right. Let's keep going. So now we're going to have a bit of a open discussion now on, and this is coming to the end of the first bit. We're going to have a break after this, right? So you've got the line coming up. Like everyone, you know, get your mics out, and so what are your thoughts from what you've seen and on this topic, right? What is or what is not after action review or debriefing? Any additional comments that anyone has or questions in that regard? Is everyone still with us?
Is it just us in a group? Ah, there's Tane. Thanks, Tane.
Yeah, look, I like the point about the feedback and not just making it a feedback session. And yeah, certainly, especially when you're first starting out, that's kind of where you tend to go with these types of sessions and that discussion. And again, a bit like I said at the start when I introduced myself, just trying to make sure that it's not just the debriefer or the facilitator doing all the talking, and yeah, really drawing out the learnings from the learners and that skill of drawing that out.
Thanks, Dan. Excellent. Did Andy? Did you have something to say there? I think you did sort of unmute for a few seconds, and you know, if you do that,
yeah, I was just interested really. To me, the success or the failure based upon your slide, JB, which I thought was awesome, is down to the facilitator. And how do we know the facilitator's good?
Yeah.
Well, a good question, Andy. And yeah. I wrote in the text that sometimes.
Yeah, I like the hidden role. I really enjoyed that comment.
Yeah,
I think you're right. To me, as a technology provider, it still requires a lot on the facilitator, and you also got a good point. When I've done lecturing before, you can sometimes look at somebody and you're down to, okay, you're absorbing all the information, but have you really taken it in? Do you really understand it? That's a very much a human to human and a facilitator function rather than a technology function.
Yeah.
And if the success of a training outcome is still built upon a facilitator, it can also fail upon a facilitator.
Indeed. Thanks, Andy. Good stuff, mate. Thanks for that. Anyone else want to add in? Nanaka, you've got a point that you made there. Effective debriefing will expand paradigms of learners without feel. Yes, that's fundamental. That's the point. Is you want to make them feel safe, right? They really need to feel safe.
And Jason's point is that it's not the end of the learning. To some extent, the end of the debriefing is the beginning of the individual learning, because skills and knowledge can always be built on through direct application and review and theory. It's about how do you help the learners take that experience with them, and how do you help them understand it? I have an experience of teaching a group of students online last year. All of them passed at the rate of 65 or better. And yet when I got the feedback from the class, the standard student feedback, one student wrote, "I didn't learn anything at all in this class." Now, they all passed. They all got at least 65. Of course, I don't know which student it is, but I know he got at least 65. So the gap for him between being able to write his knowledge down and have me assess it and feel that he had learned something, that's a real concern, nothing I could control. And yet, and I was using a modified form of simulation. I really got them involved. And sometimes people will resist to the death the opportunity you offer them to take on responsibility for their own learning. I'm a member of a group that has recently changed from a process that uses a, what do you call it? Not a paradigm, one of those number things. Oh God, a mathematical formula to tell us what to do. And they've just changed the formula, and it doesn't tell us what to do anymore. We tell it what to do and what we are going to do. And what's fascinating is the number of members in that group who are saying they hate it, they don't like it. And I do think that part of what it's about is that they're being told, given responsibility for their own behaviour, and they don't know how to do that. And a debriefing is one of the points at which you can help learners take more of that personal responsibility in, but you won't always see it in their faces, whether they have or haven't.
Yeah. And I think maybe just to add one last point, and then we probably have a break, right, is that one of the things that sort of came across to me in experiencing these things through my career was that, we can all reflect individually, and in fact, that's how we change our mental models, right? We grow in life through reflection, and that's how meditation became the important thing that it was, because it was an opportunity to sort of disconnect and do that stuff. I mean, one of the fundamental value propositions that an after action review debrief brings in is that collective improvement towards a common shared mental model of things. And that's a huge challenge, because each one of us has got completely unique mental models of the world based on our experiences, our physiology, what we've learned over time. But there are some activities that you need to have everyone be in the same space with the same mental model. I mean, think about a critical operation happening in a hospital theater, that requires everyone to understand what's going on. And if you don't have a common mental model, you end up with, in defense speak, challenges of interoperability, correlation of content not being.
You guys just recovering from the morning, are you?
Yeah, I'm pretty tired.
Andrew,
It's good.
Right. So I think that's it's the one opportunity that we do have in our exercises, or the primary opportunity to have that, that collaboration and collection and alignment to establish mental models that we want to have, that are absolutely critical when it comes to safety and security and those types of aspects. So I think, given that we've all sort of talked a fair bit so far, it's at 2:30, it's 2:36 now. And so we thought we'd sort of have a quick 5-minute leg stretch and a break. So 36, what does that make it to? 36 to
41.
41. So how's that? Does that work with everyone? Have a quick break. You can just stay connected. Obviously, don't connect. We don't have any disconnection problems. You can turn off your mics and audio and all that stuff. That's fine. But so we'll come back and start in 5 minutes.
Okay, that's.
Yeah, I've just lost all my video feeds. Where the hell's that gone?
Oh no! Don't do that.
I tell you what, I'm going to stop. I'll stop sharing for a second, and maybe it'll come back. Here we go. It's back.
Oh.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
No panic.
So we'll just give people a chance to come back.
Yeah. Can everybody just put their hand up or something so that we know you're back?
Oh, that's even better. There we go.
That's
Well done.
great. Oh, that coffee cup looks good, Belinda.
Yes. Right. Where are we? Is Stephen back as well? I just want to make sure we haven't lost Stephen there.
No, he's not there at the moment.
Yeah, any minute now, I guess. So.
Oh, Alexander's back. Jason's back. That's fine. Thank you, guys.
Okay. So now, Elyssebeth, we're going to be getting to the first video here in a minute. Did you want to introduce or a bit of a background brief on the video?
Okay.
So.
What you're going to watch is a very fast fast run through of a seminal simulation event. And it's seminal because it highlighted so many issues around the briefing, the action, and then the debriefing. In 2000, and the speaker will tell you this, America ran a multi-million-dollar simulation of the invasion that became Desert Storm, I suppose it was, or yeah. And they put in charge of it a man who had been in the military for decades, but understood not only simulation, but also military practice. The one thing he missed was that the activity itself was being run for a particular purpose, and he missed it because it was not made known to him. So what you'll see is the outcome of a situation when a key player in a simulation was not given the right information, and then found himself being very public about how that can be so bad with a simulation, especially one on the scale this one was.
Right.
So off you go.
I shall share screens, and I have to remember to do the audio thing here. Don't forget that. Got the audio.
Oh yes.
Yes. So I shall start it, but just before it starts, I'll just check once that the audio is coming through okay, once it comes through. So hopefully that works. I'm just going to hit play once and just to see if the audio works and then restart.
In 2002.
It worked? Okay, here we go. Everyone here, we'll start.
In 2002, a Marine general led a fictional version of Iran in a war game against the United States and won. The US military tapped Lieutenant General Paul Van Riper to lead the Red opposing forces in the most expensive military exercise in history. He was put in command of an inferior Middle Eastern-inspired military, and his mission was to go against the full might of the American armed forces. In the first 2 days, he sank an entire carrier battle group. The exercise was called Millennium Challenge 2002. It was designed by the Joint Forces Command over the course of 2 years, and it had 13,500 participants, numerous live and simulated training sites, and was supposed to pit an Iran-like Middle Eastern country against the US military, which would be fielding advanced technology it didn't even plan to implement until 5 years later. The war game would begin with a forced entry exercise that included the 82nd Airborne and the 1st Marine Division. When the Blue Forces issued a surrender ultimatum, Van Riper, commanding the Red Forces, turned them down. Since the Bush doctrine of the period included preemptive strikes against perceived enemies, Van Riper knew the Blue Forces would be coming for him, and they did. But the 3-star general didn't spend 41 years in the Marine Corps being timid. As soon as the US Navy was beyond the point of no return, he hit him. And he hit him hard. Missiles from land-based units, civilian boats, and low-flying planes tore through the fleet as explosives-laden speedboats decimated the Navy using suicide tactics. His signal to initiate the attack was a coded message sent from the minarets of mosques at the call to prayer. In under 10 minutes, the whole thing was over, and Lieutenant General Paul Van Riper was victorious. So, how did 19 ships and some 20,000 US troops end up at the bottom of the Persian Gulf? It started with the OPFOR leadership. Van Riper was the epitome of the salty Marine Corps general officer. He was a 41-year veteran, both enlisted and commissioned, serving everywhere from Vietnam to Desert Storm. Van Riper attended the Marine Corps Amphibious Warfare School, the College of Naval Command and Staff, Army War College, and the Army's Airborne and Ranger schools. That is not the ribbon rack of a timid individual. In fact, the 3-star general had been retired for some 5 years by the time he led the Red Forces of Millennium Challenge. He was an old school Marine capable of some old school tactics, and he insisted that technology cannot replace human intuition and the study of basic nature of war, which he called a, quote, terrible, uncertain, chaotic, bloody business. When Van Riper commented on Millennium Challenge, he said that the Blue Forces were stuck in their own mode of thinking. Their vastly superior technology included advanced intelligence matrices and an operational net assessment that told them where the OPFOR vulnerabilities were and what Van Riper was most likely to do next out of a range of possible scenarios. They relied heavily on that. When the Blue took out Red's microwave towers and fiber optics, they expected his forces to use satellite and cell phones that could be monitored. Not a chance. Van Riper instead used motorcycle couriers, messages hidden in prayers, and even coded lighting systems on his airfields. Tactics employed during World War II. He struck first. He calculated how many cruise missiles their ships could handle, and in his terms, simply launched more than that. In fact, Van Riper hated the kind of analytical decision-making the Blue Forces were doing. He believed it took far too long. His resistance plan included ways of getting his people to make good decisions, using rapid cognition and analog but reliable communications. The other commanders involved called foul, complaining that a real OPFOR would never use the tactics Van Riper used. Except Van Riper's flotilla used boats and explosives like those used against the USS Cole in 2000, when it was attacked by a small explosives-laden boat in a Yemen port. In the end, the Blue Forces were all respawned, and Van Riper was prevented from making moves to counter the Blue Forces' landing. He had no radar, and wasn't allowed to shoot down incoming aircraft he would have otherwise accurately targeted. The rest of the exercise was scripted to let the Blue Force land and win. Van Riper walked out when he realized his commands were being ignored by the exercise planners. The jig was up. The 3-star wrote a 21-page critique of the exercise that was immediately classified. Van Riper spoke out against the rigged game anyway. Nothing was learned from this, he wrote. A culture not willing to think hard and test itself does not augur well for the future. Couldn't agree more. Like this video, give it a share, and let us know in the comments what you think.
Right, Elyssebeth, can you still hear me?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Okay, my computer's gone all funny. So what I'm going to do for a second is if you sort of have a quick chat about this video,
I'll take over the debriefing. Just stop.
Yeah, I'm going to leave and come back in. Something
sure,
funny.
okay.
All right then. I'll be back shortly.
Right. So I guess my question to everyone is what did that bring to mind for people? Why would you think? Why for you would that fit in a debriefing mode? When we're talking about debriefing. Todd, what do you reckon? Jane?
Can you hear me?
Yep, I can.
Oh, something worked. Oh my God.
How about that?
Oh, my God. I'm thinking that what my intentions of the exercise are would be different to somebody else's.
Yep.
And in that one, they went rogue.
Absolutely.
And I've seen I can't speak from a military point of view, never done any military exercises, but I've seen some scenarios that we've done be hijacked, for want of a better word, and it goes rogue. And then you're trying to debrief two different things.
Yes.
What should have happened and what did happen. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. That's a really good point. And if you're trying to do both of those, how on earth do you split your brain and your awareness so that you're able to talk to both of those at once? Jason, do you want to put some more in there? Because this, I think, would be particularly relevant in your context. And so put some more in the chat and we'll share it. Nanako, what about you? I know it's not the kind of game that you'd be playing, but can you see, have you had an experience of things going wrong like that?
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Yes. I have seen this kind of video or experience when I visited Pearl Harbor's museum.
Ah.
Yes, so I cannot explain here, but And, you know, starting point is very important for debriefing. So I'd like to say that's all.
Yeah, no, that's the starting point is so vital for the debriefing. And for Van Riper, what their starting point was not to tell him the truth. And his debriefing has been going on for the last 20 years. If they thought to silence him, it didn't work. So, you know, the key for me around that experience is about understanding that your briefing, your action and your debriefing are integrated. And you've got to make sure that all of the players understand the whole environment. Even when some of the things are not going to be revealed, you've got to make it clear to the essential players what is essential for them to know. So Jason's comment is no-win situation is not a good way to train, because all of the learning outcomes are skewed, and that's exactly what Van Riper said. You know, you didn't learn about whether your technology could work or not. You didn't learn about what kinds of responses you might actually get if you invade Iraq. You know, there were so many things that they didn't learn because they were so focused on running a great activity to test their equipment. There's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. But make sure that you tell all the other players that that's what you're trying to do. Otherwise, you know, you're giving people, you are creating an environment that is not true to your intentions. You won't get the learning outcomes that you wanted. The participants will walk away from it saying, what a waste of time that was. I mean, there are so many things can go wrong if you do not hold congruency from beginning through to end. I guess I get passionate about this one because this is one of only 2 points in my whole doctoral program where my supervisor understood what I was doing. He brought in to me, that's a different journey, but he brought into me an article about Van Riper, and it would have been in 2002. So it was right at the time he started going public. And he said, is this what you're talking about? And I thought, yay, Mark understands. And yes, what a fabulous example. So, and it still stands out as one of the best. Yeah, so that's me on Van Riper. It's just go and have a look, keep it in mind. If your briefing and your action are not congruent, then your debriefing will be a disaster, because as Todd says, you're trying to manage two things and neither of them are going to work. You can't really juggle two balls effectively. 3's fine, 2's not. Steve, what about you?
Yep, nothing from me.
Right, I'm back, so I'm going to try again.
Okay.
I don't know what happened there, but we'll try sharing screens and getting back into it. So here we go. See how this works. It's all going so well too. Right, so it looks like it's
I had to go wrong sometime.
Yeah, good, thank you. So right, we're on to debriefing structures now. And so let's keep the mics and things on. So as we go into this, so first of all, let's have a bit of a chat. Are there particular structures that you've employed in your particular context? Why you might use these structures? How effective are they?
Todd, you've got one.
Yeah, we identified that there was a bit of a problem for the novice simulation educator in health through a series of different evaluations we did. And what kept coming up consistently was that as a beginner educator, I don't know all of the tools in the debriefing toolbox, and then I don't know which ones to pull out at which time. So what they tended to do was pick one that they felt comfortable with and apply that in every situation, which we know is just not going to work. So that's how we came up with the SimChat debriefing model. So we wanted to demystify it and remove, I'm just going to say it, some of the wankerism around what happens sometimes. There you go, I've said it.
Beep that out. Yes, go.
Put that one out. But it was a little bit more about people could talk something up so high that you had no understanding if you didn't understand the rudimentaries of it. So we just wanted to pare it right back and keep it really simple and have a chat. Let's just have a chat. And a chat would imply it's a two-way thing. Sometimes debrief I know the intention is it's meant to be a two-way thing, but sometimes it comes across as a one-way thing. I'm here to tell you what you didn't do right. And so that's how we came up with SimChat, and it all, you know, there's a chart that goes with it. For the novice educator, with some sections on the back to take notes that you can use during your debrief. We've had really good feedback from people who've used it, and we're mindful now that NetSim is actually not going to be freely available, that there's going to be an opportunity for people who are not in a position to be able to actually access NetSim for whatever reason, that people will turn to this one. So, you know, there might be other opportunities for us to do other online material in relation to simulation. But at the moment, this was providing a framework and a template for the novice to work through.
So first of all, Todd, hang on to that thought about NetSim, because I think Phil is looking at what SimOst may do about that. So maybe we work out some collaborations, because I think what you've done with your model is brilliant for that process of moving people from novice through. And Jason said, asking the participants about how they feel they went and what would they improve next time. Absolutely. It gets them going, lets them carry it, talk through what happened, and then you become the guide. So you can ask open questions. Just to move the conversation. That's really important, Jason. Yeah.
There was a comment yesterday in a session I was at, and it was about sometimes the debrief turns into the sage on the stage versus the guide on the side.
Yeah.
We're really quite mindful of, and I think it was Andrew Coughlin, his presentation, and it was about, they measured the amount of time that the facilitator spoke, the amount of time that each individual spoke, and then they actually tracked the way the conversation went, which was fascinating.
Okay, Andrew, you're in the group. Would you like to talk about that a bit? Is your mic working?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Go for it. Please.
What did you want? What do you want?
Todd's just referenced you. She dobbed you in. About how you did your survey and what you found with regard to how the facilitators manage debriefings. So
yeah,
would you just like to give us a quick summary maybe of your key points?
Okay. So as in my presentation yesterday, in terms of the dash stuff. Okay. Yeah. So we basically looked at 12 debriefings, and the goal was to improve our peer feedback and coaching of debriefers, both new and experienced, and everything that's been said about the challenge of debriefing, complex, and the difference between debriefing and obviously feedback is challenging. When you observe even experienced debriefers providing feedback instead of debriefing, it's frustrating. So I suppose it grew out of a passion to just improve our own local, the quality of our debriefing locally, and we're working with people at Stanford. Lou Halamek is a neonatology consultant and a simulation person there, and he's worked with NASA, and he found the debriefing at NASA was very straightforward, and essentially groups would just sort of debrief themselves. And when they actually analyzed their debriefing or their debriefers, they used quantitative measures like how long does the debriefer talk for, how long does each participant talk for, how many questions are asked, how many statements are made. So they didn't give sort of wishy-washy, scalable behavioral sort of things like the DASH score or the OSAD. They actually gave concrete quantitative information to their debriefers. So what we did just locally is we just took 12 debriefings and we provided some quantitative information to the debriefers. For example, how long does each participant talk for? How long did you talk for? How long did the co-debriefer talk for? What was the ratio of the amount of time the debriefer spoke compared to the participants? Presumably a lower ratio is good and a higher ratio is bad. How many statements did you make? How many questions did you ask? How many responses did you get per question asked? Stuff like that. So basically, we found that the groups where the debriefer talked less had higher DASH scores, both from their faculty supervisor, but also from the participants. So that's a traditional way of measuring things. So I guess the lessons to learn for the group are, well, debriefing is hard. We don't do a typical Australian sim centre like Westmead, where people are trained, even experienced simulation educators talk a lot, like I'm talking now. They talk more than the participants a lot of the time. But when you talk less than them, they seem to prefer that. And also, we just observed that people tend to talk about sort of higher level stuff when they're allowed to converse with each other rather than the debriefer dominating the conversation. So that would be a 2.5 minute summary.
Brilliantly done, Andrew. And I've just put, because I couldn't get to your session yesterday, and we finally worked out in the afternoon what the technology problem was. I was very frustrated because I wanted to be there. And I've just put in the chat something you reminded me of from Lao Tzu. A leader facilitator is one who, when it is done, the people say, we did it ourselves. That's, the less the facilitator talks, the more the participants talk, the higher the facilitators score, because they are doing that thinking and learning for themselves.
See, in Queensland, basically they did a study with pediatric outreach, like it was equivalent to remote sim in New South Wales, and they basically compared debriefing actively and just leaving them with a debriefing tool in the room by themselves, and they did equally well in both. So you probably, do you even need a debriefer half the time? You probably do, but
Well, as long as you've got a tool that they can work to, because yes, everybody needs leadership, and the leadership doesn't have to be a person all the time. It can just be a process that people work through. But
I think we place a lot of pressure on ourselves a lot of the time to perform, when in fact we potentially don't.
We don't need
to so much pressure on ourselves.
It's that carryover from being the stand and deliver expert. Yeah. Thanks, Andrew. That was great. And you can tell Todd what you think of her afterwards for dobbing you in, but we really
I literally stepped out for 2 minutes. Sorry. Yeah. I heard my name being taken in vain.
That's great. Thanks. So Tane's also added the experience of the learners, of the participants. So the differences, the students versus health professionals.
And just whether you need that debriefer physically there and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think letting students alone the first time or something like that, it's probably not going to be a good idea.
No.
Whereas, more experienced health professionals.
That's good. That's perfect segue into the next.
You're
slide.
welcome.
Yes, thank you, Tane. So yes, I mean, so this is. I think all of you have seen this framework. I think we've talked about it quite a bit, especially through this conference as well. So you really have to sense where you are in this framework. And so, when you have new students coming in, you don't leave them by themselves, or you're going to end up with the chaos. And ideally, you want to sort of bring them around. I'm assuming everyone's familiar with this, so even if you're not, we'll do a quick sort of intro into the framework, and then Elyssebeth's got some really important points to make with regards to this framework. So just the Cynefin 101. So this is a framework David Snowden came up with in the mid 80s, basically. And he called it the sense-making tool. It really, he sort of said the world has 3 types of systems. There are ordered systems, which is essentially everything to the right of this construct, this side over here. And ordered systems are the clear and the complicated in this diagram. So ordered systems, complex systems, and chaotic systems. And so you broke it up, the world, the nature, everything has got, anything you look at is you can classify into one of these 3 types of systems, and they have certain characteristics. And as we go through them, we have to change the way we approach the situation. So for example, in the clear, in the bottom right side of things, this is where things are fixed and constrained. Essentially, everyone knows how things work, and you just have to categorize it into what's going on. So you sense first, you then categorize what you've sensed. So for example, you go into a shopping center and you look at the shop on the right, and it's got some groceries in the front, and and it's got stuff at the back. So you categorize it as a grocery store, and then you sort of appropriately either walk in or you go somewhere else. So it's a very standard way of doing things. It's everyone knows how to do stuff. It's clear. We know what we're going to do, and it's called the best practices is what happens over there. One of the risks in this type of system is where everything is defined and constrained is that if you go outside the scope of the system, you go into chaos, basically, because no one knows how to deal with it. So a classic example is as a government office. You go into a government office, or you go into like a post office or something. There's a category of the types of things that you can do, and there's a standard way of doing each of those things. If you come in with anything that doesn't fit into one of those categories, then Bob's your uncle, basically. You have to go and find another way of working out what's going on. or you're going to end up really frustrated because it doesn't work that way. So everyone knows exactly what it is, how to do it. The category on the top, the complicated, is what David Stone calls good practice. So here there are governing constraints, but there are now pockets of know-how. So there are groups of things where within the group everyone knows, within the group things are clear, but between the groups they might not be that clear, but we know what the interfaces and the connections are. And if we actually do a bit of work of understanding, we can work out what it is. So the approach that he suggests over here is one of sensing. You get data from that sense, you then analyze that to work out what's going on, and then you work it out and then you respond. Whereas in the clear one, there's no analysis required. It's just a category. This is what it is. Bang, I know what to do. In this one, you've got to do a bit of analysis. So the example of the bottom one might be a post office. An example of the complicated might be an aircraft. So it's complicated, but you can work out exactly what happens, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to fly it, right? I mean, everything has to be understood and put together. So the right-hand side then is what he called the ordered domain. And so this is really cause and effect. So everything on the right-hand side is cause and effect, and it's constrained. When you move into the complex domain, now we are not in a constrained cause-effect environment, we're in a connected environment. So things are connected, but not constrained. And therefore, the way you deal with the situations in this place is that you have to look for patterns. You don't know what things are, and you look for patterns and you try and establish those patterns to understand them. And in the meantime, you have to put some bounds around this area, some boundaries, and while you're looking for patterns, you look at what you can do to change those patterns, but you can't directly influence them. You have to essentially, you change the environment basically to change the patterns. And he calls this the acceptive region, where there are enabling constraints. So you might put a boundary around it. You could say, you know, when the kids are in a party, you could say you can only go into that room, and that room, and you lock off all the other rooms. And then within this room, you make sure, for example, you know, that the temperature's right and the environment's appropriate for whatever they might be doing, playing game or anything like that. And if you want them to perhaps stop playing, then you might, you know, turn the heating off so the room gets cold. So you can contain the environment to control the situation in a sense, but you have boundaries defined around it. So the approach over there is you have to probe. First probe, so you stick something in, then you sense, and then you respond based on what you get back. And then in the chaotic domain, it's essentially there's no rules. You haven't got a clue what's going on, and you really have to do something, and then see what happens as a result of that, and then respond. So it's act, sense, and respond. So this is a classic example of an alien landing on Earth, for example, and can't communicate, doesn't know how to talk, doesn't even understand transport, anything about how we are over here, and even physiologically might not understand that, and so it's completely lost. So that's a quick overview of those domains, and I might now put in a few additional bits and get Elyssebeth to jump in on this. So Elyssebeth, do you want to talk about these aspects in particular, and bring in the?
Oh, hang on, I just got to. I've had it on small.
Oh, sorry, you got that.
I actually,
yeah, go on.
No, I think they're fine. I'd like just take quickly going through. The clear one is situation is known. If you want to do a really straightforward part task trainer, how to do injections properly, then you'd be using simulations in the clear domain. Where the situation is discoverable, you'll be doing simulations that require exploration and research. And then you move over to the other side, the complex domain. They're the ones where you set something running, and every time the participants are there, it will be different. And you've got what David calls enabling constraints. You've put some enabling constraints around it. Often enough, and I'll go to the next slide in a moment, participants will confuse governing and enabling constraints. So I might talk about that. And then there are, like Pip Lyndon James's mass casualty incident. It's kind of like she knew exactly what she was doing. She had it timed and structured, and New South Wales ambulance and hospital, the whole box and dice. But for the participants, from the time the moment went, that is the ones who were the responders, all they could do was act in regard to what they were seeing, make sense of what they were seeing, and then work out later the nature of the responses. She's got some fabulous videos showing different ways in which the students took on that act, sense, respond effect. So can you go to the next slide?
Yeah, and one more point just quickly before we do that.
Yeah, sure.
The area in the middle.
Yes.
Yeah, this bit.
Yes.
So this is typically what David Stone has broken down into two, but this is where confusion reigns supreme. So this is where you're trying to work out, how should I be dealing with the situation I'm in, which domain I'm in, so I can apply the appropriate technique. Am I going to sense, categorize, response? Am I going to sense, analyze, respond, or whatever? It's that area of confusion, unknown, and then you work out what it is, and then you move into that domain, and then you apply the appropriate approach. The other quick point about this is the reason it looks very neuron-like is this was done. I think David obviously did this from a perspective. So he hates calling this quadrants, right? It's not about lines. These are boundaries in a sense. And the reason they're curved is he brings in this scientific connotation here of state change. So we're going from, for example, from liquid to gas, or from liquid to solid. So there's a phase change that happens, and that change of state doesn't just happen, along a straight edge and you're over. It usually takes time, and it takes certain conditions, and they have to evolve. So for example, when you boil water reaches 100 degrees, and poof, it doesn't just all evaporate at 100 degrees, right? It boils, and there's a latent heat of vaporization that comes in, which has to be, you continue adding heat, and the water slowly evaporates and changes state, and it goes away. So there's a settling time for each of these. And when something's in between, I think Elyssebeth calls it the liminal stage. What's that? I can never say that properly.
The green space is what he calls the liminal space, because it's a period of time. It's usually indicated by a period of time when you are preparing to move from an awareness of complicated to an awareness of complexity. So I was on another call this morning, and one of the guys on the call really loves this model, thinks it's really useful, but was expressing concerns about how to get his clients to use it. And what I suggested to him was that he himself is in doubt. He's sitting in that liminal space. He knows it might be useful. He can see how it can help, but he has not yet been able to step into working fully in that complex mode. So that's the green line, that liminal space. In the center where he's got AC, aporetic is a term he's borrowed from biology, I think, and it's about a state of confusion where things seem to be either orderly or confused, and you're not quite sure. And so hence this aporetic or confusion center. And for us with simulations, what I now understand is that many of the simulations we use, anything that's beyond a simple part-task trainer, exists with the likelihood of tipping people into that confusion space, and or tipping them over into a sense of a chaotic space. And can we move on, JB? Because I think
yes.
Yeah.
There we go. So that's a good segue into that. Yeah.
So I'm just a slight detour. This is a way of thinking about all the simulations you run. It's a continuum, and some activities will have overlaps, but right out at the end of the continuum, there is on the left-hand side, on David's ordered side, closed simulations, which are a problem. This is the problem. How will you solve it? This is the needle and the dosage that you have to get into the patient. This is the time frame you've got. Here's an intervening variable, and how are you going to solve the puzzle? Somebody else knows the answer. It is something to which there is a known solution. Lots and lots of activities are closed. And interestingly, lots and lots of facilitators that I know turn any simulation they run into a closed simulation, because they have a desperate need to make sure that people understand the answer in the puzzle at the end. On the other hand is the open simulation. This is the situation. What are you going to do? any emergency department simulation should exist in the open domain of simulations, I believe. If you think you know what people are going to do and should do, then it's a closed simulation and you're not really preparing them for the uncertainties of what might happen in an unanticipated environment. I've got a lovely story. Simulation was running. It was an emergency heart problem, and somebody stepped on the power cord for the mannequin, and of course it went dead. Now, two things happened. The participants in the simulation immediately went into overdrive. Heart has stopped. We have to resuscitate this patient as fast as we can. They did exactly what they were supposed to do in the simulation. However, the facilitator and the technician blew it all apart by saying in the mic, into the room, sorry, fellas, we lost the power for a minute. We'll be back on. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the facilitators should have, as soon as they said that, stopped everything and run a debrief. There is no point then putting the mannequin back to life and saying, now carry on. It's impossible. So in an open simulation, the facilitator needs to be really clear. Not only is the outcome unpredictable, but often the path on the way through is. It's an unsolved problem. So it's really helpful for all facilitators, choosers, users of simulations to work out where along this spectrum is the activity you're planning to use likely to fall. If it's going to have predictable results and you know what's going to happen and your debriefing is going to be around how well you did and what went wrong, then it's a closed simulation. You have a particular form of debriefing. If it's here's the situation and we'll see afterwards what you did, then it's open and it's an unsolved problem and no solutions will ever be twice exactly the same. So next slide, JB. So what we've got here is just more or less putting what I've said into a visual thing. The closed simulations are on the ordered domain, open simulations are on the unordered. Order is not apparent in one set, it is apparent in the other. And of course, in the middle, you've got disorder. And at times, if you're using complicated, particularly extremely complicated simulations, participants will feel that they're in that domain of disorder and they will beg, plead and drag you back into the clear domain. Just tell us what to do unless you're alert. So understanding this way of thinking about simulations gives you as a facilitator a much better strategy for planning how you brief it, what you do in the action, and then how you structure your debriefing. And I think I've got one more slide, yes. JB.
Yep.
Yeah, so this is some work I'm doing with a colleague in the States where we see a lot of our activities falling are shown up here. So in teaching, in the clear context, the teaching and learning context is clear. We've got direct instructions and you've got a really clear design for learning. In the closed, you've got things like flipped classrooms, differentiated instruction, problem-based learning. They are still closed because somebody knows the answer. Then you move over into game-based learning, which is the liminal space. In game-based learning, what we're seeing is that people are still hanging on to that need to structure. And of course, in a game, in any computer game I've yet seen, because it's a program and somebody has written the program, even when it's a roll your own adventure, there is always an ending known to someone. I haven't yet seen, but I'm sure people are working on electronic simulations that are going to go right out into that open simulation. So going back to Operation Millennium, they may have thought they were running an open simulation, but they're doing it with the closed simulation mindset. And when it went wrong, they didn't know how to respond. So you've got after action reviews, inquiry-based, and that kind of work is in the complex. So after action review shouldn't be there. I meant to take that out, but inquiry-based learning, all forms of open simulation fit. And in that aporetic, confused state, that's where, as JB said, you've got to decide where are you. And for simulations taking you into the chaotic domain, they're the hardest ones of all. When Sullenberger landed his plane in the Hudson, the Federal Aeronautics Administration had an inquiry, and they were quite prepared to crucify him because the simulators told them that he could have got either to Teterboro or back to LaGuardia. So they were quite comfortable. But what they didn't know, and he had to work out, is they ran those simulators in the flight simulators as closed simulations. They did not take into account the actual state that he was in. And he fortunately, if you watch the movie called Sully, it's a brilliant exposition of how he, as somebody his life was on the edge with regard to this. They were quite convinced, using closed simulation strategies, complicated assessments, that they had him. He could have got back. As soon as he pointed out that he was doing other things besides turning the plane around and get back, they took 30 seconds off the pilots in the simulators, and there was no way, no matter how often they did it, both crashed. His solution to go into the river was the only viable solution. But he did not know an ending of that until afterwards. The learning happens afterwards. For me, this is where games and simulations fit in the Cynefin domains. Understanding the type of game you're running, understanding how to debrief it, and looking at whether you're going to be asking open or closed questions and using open or closed frameworks. So that's my passionate run for 2 minutes. JB, back to you. Unless people would like to ask questions, happy to answer questions.
Can I just add, we use the Sully example in communication,
right.
In what we're doing with human factors. And air traffic controllers are taught to land a plane in an airport, whereas pilots are taught to ditch the plane wherever it's the safest. So they're coming from a different, what is the normal expectation anyway. Yeah.
And he happened to have been a pilot who knew you could land a plane on water from other prior life experiences. So, you know, that it was, but understanding that that's the domain he was in. The chairman of the FAA board that day looked at him after it was all over and said, I'm realizing that this is the first time I've ever conducted a board like this and had the pilot of the plane involved sitting there in front of me. Yeah, and that just changed, it changed everything, you know, that what he did seemed mad but worked. And, you know, it's part of simulation, helps people see beyond the ordinary, I think. Okay, JB.
Excellent. I'm going to keep moving then on to the next few. We've got a few more slides and then another the next section. So here we go. So here are some, so given that excellent contextual discussion over there, here are a couple of approaches, structures, we want to call them. So on the left is the formal, a formal structure, and on the right, you know, sometimes we might run it more informally. So on the formal one, they specifically suggest that it's someone who's separate from the actual team that does the exercise for independence. That it actually takes the appropriate amount of time needs to be allocated, scheduled. Use of structured review techniques and tools, you know, and some of the stuff we've talked about previously. It is planned well beforehand, so it's not a surprise. It's, you know, we're going to do a debrief now. It's, you know, it's going to happen formally. You do it. Conducted in appropriate settings to act to that formal aspect to it, and requires some sort of a thorough, objective means of follow-up afterwards. So there's, again, formality to the whole thing, but it doesn't have to be that way every time. It depends on the scope and the context. So, but you know, really we should be conducting these every time we conduct any sort of a training activity or a simulation, and just afterwards, after we've done it, to take that, you know, that experiential learning element to it, to do the reflection so that we can then improve going forward. Conduct them whenever they're needed at the site, and it's up to you really whether you follow up with the closing out formality to it or whether, you know, it just continues on in depending on the need. But the key fundamental questions, right, they remain the same no matter what. You know, it's what happened, what was supposed to happen, why what actually happened, and you know, what did we learn from this? How can we do better? And the fundamental objective is an expansion of those mental models and a commonality sharing of mental models. That's what we're looking for, right, at the end of the day, that we're growing our learning and understanding, and we're having a common threshold that's lifting up across the team. So everyone's growing in that space. I'm going to, just sensitive time, I'm going to move on to the next one and actually get Stephen to sort of jump in on this one, if you could, Steve.
Yeah, that's fine, JB. So this starts to get into some of the questions that people have raised throughout the day, but also right at the start, and some of the issues that people want to explore. We talked a little bit before about the structure of a debrief, and there usually is one. It can take several different forms, but ultimately there is pretty generally accepted that there is an area for emotions, there is or reactions, it's often termed in health. There is a analysis stage or phase, and then there is a bit of a summary phase or a wrap up, which often includes the lessons learned and the where to from here. This aligns nicely. We talked a little bit about Kolb before, which was the conceptual framework for reflective learning. Gibbs adapted that or extended it into more of a how you apply Kolb's model into everyday practice. And so if you have a look at the phases there, very much of what JB and we've been talking about throughout today, where there is an understanding starting off with very low levels of reflection activity, where it's a description of what happened. So if you're looking to get people to start engaging in a reflective conversation, which ultimately an AAR or a debrief is, that's what we're wanting to achieve. Start off with the easy things. What is simply describing what happened in that situation. What are the feelings that people are thinking about, moving on to feelings, then going on to the evaluations, so trying to understand what was good and what was bad about it, how can you make sense around that, what else could have been done, what are alternatives of that situation, and then what is the action plan if that situation was to arise again. So those basic phases, or those questions that are presented by Gibbs, and if you go and have a look at his actual work, it's a perfect model for reflective learning, because the cues and the questions that are the expanded Gibbs model is fantastic. But essentially what we're looking at is kind of three phases. So if you're particularly if you're dealing with emotions, and let's just remind ourselves that, from me anyway, I think one of the most important things with a simulation is the engagement of emotion, because it's a really good motivator for learning. Again, going back to the car analogy or metaphor, is that you have when we're learning to drive in a manual, the embarrassment of grinding the gears, of bunny hopping, of all of those things in public in particular, in maybe shopping car parks, maybe. You don't want to do that again, because it's embarrassing and all those sorts of things. So it is that emotional engagement that you go, yeah, I kind of need to stop doing that and learn how to not do that and change the outcome, really, or change my behavior to get a better outcome. So there's that emotions part. In the simulation debrief, it is really important to put in some strategies to acknowledge what the emotions are, to recognize the emotions and deal with it. That can be something as simple as tapping people on the shoulder, getting them to say in one word what their first impression is of that situation, or how they're feeling right now. So it doesn't have to be a great deep exploration. Some disciplines, particularly in healthcare, some disciplines will want to explore that in a great deal of depth, because that's what their core business is dealing with people's feelings, dealing with emotions, and helping to work through those. That's not what we're necessarily looking at today. And for the emotions, then you can move on to the analysis part, and that can be, as Todd was saying before, and as we've had some examples of, this is usually the tricky part. It can be really, really simple, or it can be incredibly complex. Now that depends on, as JB's been talking about, and Elyssebeth, the nature of the simulation. So the debriefing part, this is where we start to consider, particularly in a simulation or a planned activity, in the design phase, how much time do we have for the debrief? Because quite often it won't happen, because people are focused on the pre-brief and on the activity itself, and they're not really conscious of or considerate of the amount of time it may take to run a proper debrief or an effective debrief. So there are the considerations around time. There are also the considerations for the analysis component, as has been discussed before by several people, around what does the analysis component look like? How is that facilitated? What if we use a model? What does the model look like? Todd's, regardless of if you've got novice debriefers, putting those cues, having cards available for people, or a guide or a flow chart or some cheat sheet that people can use to help them facilitate the debrief is incredibly important to ensure that there is a safety net for people to use. And so, it might be analysis light, it might be very much descriptive, and we don't go too much into feelings, evaluation, and description, and that's okay. It's understanding what the purpose of the simulation is and the learner group that you really want to engage as to how deep you want to go and who you're working with. So, for example, if we're working with a group of consultants or registrars and experienced people, we would want to go into a fairly deep, chances are a fairly reflective, deep debrief, because we'd want to certainly push that a little bit more than just skim across the surface, because it's likely to be possibly a wasted opportunity. The summary phase is that period. So that third part of the debrief is the summary phase, where it is the wrap up. The facilitator can actually wrap up the session and re-highlight the key points, the lessons learned, to get people to discuss or reveal what has been most meaningful for them. If there's changes that would be intended to happen in the future, it's a good point to finish on that note, as to say, well, what would you do? What are you going to take away from this experience into your future practice? And that's definitely reflecting the last part of Gibbs' cycle. JB, next slide, please. And so just sort of extending what we're talking about there are three components to reflection. There is remembering or recall. There is remembering. So we're looking at, thinking about and remembering what people have said, or remembering what's been done. This is in a debrief or anything experience. There is a recollection, so thinking a little bit more deeply, and then there is reflection and reflective practice. So we've talked a lot about models, we've talked about debriefing, we talked before about the experience of facilitators, how much time that people spend on. So Andrew was talking about the amount of time that facilitators spend, and indeed quite a bit of, it's been interesting to see over the years. One group, I think it was the group from Harvard Simulation, described high levels of facilitation as where the facilitator doesn't talk at all or very little, and low levels of facilitation is when they teach. So looking at those experiences, the question before about the fear of going wrong, what happens when debriefing goes wrong? Well, it becomes a teaching session at the very least, and at the worst, it becomes emotionally scarring for people, but often it'll end up a teaching session. So there's also been some work around the types of questions asked, and thinking about the level of questioning that we want to engage and use during a debrief. So if we're looking at low levels of questions where it doesn't require a great deal of thinking, doesn't require a great deal of reflection, we'd be looking at questions around remembering. So, if we're looking at remembering type questions, so what did you do when you entered the room? What's the first thing that you did? If we're talking about a person who might have been, dizzy when they sit up or something like that, tell me what the person's hemoglobin was. If we need a little bit more depth in terms of reflection, then we can enter sort of questions in the recollection domain, which is around, well, what did that hemoglobin value mean to you or tell you about the patient? So they're starting to think not just about what happened, but making the connections between what happened and theoretical, professional knowledge and theoretical content. If we're then looking at questions that rely on reflection or digging into the reflective domain, is what do you know about this person that explains how they came to have a low HB? What are the priorities for the care of this person at this point, and why do they take precedence over an alternative? So again, it's a deeper level of inquiry. It requires more cognitive thought. It requires greater understanding of all the components that people bring to a situation in their professional space or the discipline space. So it's good just to sort of think about where we're positioning the questions as well in relation to the learners and when we're presenting these questions. So before, when I was talking about debriefing, facilitating a debrief, and seeing that we're losing people along the way for various reasons. It might be that we've headed into reflection and we're starting to take people into more challenging territory for them. And again, you know, put this into context, I'm talking very much from an undergraduate perspective. If you're thinking about the levels of questioning in this way and the levels of reflection, it really starts to make sense about, okay, I've gone into the reflective area, I'm starting to get people to think a bit more deeply, I'm starting to lose them, maybe I better drop back to the remembering or the recollection just to see if I can pick them up again and re-engage. Next slide, please, JB. Now, I know, you know, models will have places, and some people really dislike models of debriefing, others are quite a fan. Some people are quite ambivalent around them. But I think ultimately for the questions that were raised earlier around, we've got novice debriefers, how do we bring them up to speed? How do we ensure that people who are novice debriefers or may lack confidence in debriefing and facilitating conversations make it through safely? How do we build people's confidence up? Where do we start? And so some of the ways I think around that, and as highlighted by Todd, is to provide frameworks for people, whatever that framework is, but have some structure that reflects the type of debriefing or conversation that you want to have with the participant group. So Plus Delta is not really a debriefing model, but it's certainly been employed over many years as either a tool for gathering feedback, a tool for possibly debriefing, and quite often a starting point for a very in-depth debrief, just to see at the start what has worked well and what hasn't. So a really simple way, and this is going back to the point that Belinda raised earlier about if people aren't keen necessarily to contribute and engage in a conversation, I found something like Plus Delta a really easy way to get people to engage, and they don't actually have to say a word. So for example, you can use a whiteboard, you could use butcher's paper, you can use post-it notes, but there are two categories. Basically, you're looking at the instruction being the plus and the delta. You can get people to identify what the behaviors and the knowledge were, that what went well, really. So what is the plus? And then what is the change? What would you like to do differently? So some people will say it's, you know, Plus Delta is around what worked well, what didn't go so well. But the literal translation of Delta is change. And so if we're looking at what went well and what would you change, there is a greater level of seeking understanding and reflection by asking what would you change, because then you can say why. If you want to explore why it didn't go so well, that's fine, but that ultimately shouldn't be the end point, because what you would like to know is to, if people understand and can explore why things didn't go so well, but we'd like to actually see where we go to next. And so there's a nice little distinction just between Plus Delta as what went well and what would you change versus what went well and simply what didn't go so well. I'll just go to the next slide and then we'll have a couple of questions. Another structure that's often well received and is quite useful is Pendleton's rules of feedback. People will be very familiar with this model. It's usually given a much less complimentary term, but usually because it's what went well, what didn't go so well, and then what went well will give a positive, then give a negative, and then give a positive. But Pendleton's rules of feedback as a structure in itself is something that most people are quite familiar with, and it is structured. So you can plan a debrief around this. The nice thing with Pendleton's is it stops the facilitator from taking the floor. And the reasons by doing that, there are very clear roles here. There are very clear activities for people to do. So the first thing for the facilitator using Pendleton's is to clarify any points of information that might need some clarification. You ask the people who are directly involved in the situation what they did well. So we're just focusing on the strengths and what went well. We're not getting the people who want to go down to the weaknesses or what didn't go so well, but we can bring them back in and focus exactly on what went well. The why will probably come into that conversation as well. There is a discussion there. We can add observations as a facilitator, but if there's a group involved, it's good to involve the group first before the facilitator comes into the conversation. And what this pattern does is stops the facilitator from talking because most of the observations will probably come out in the conversation between the people who are directly involved and the observers, if there are observers. By the time it comes to the facilitator, there may not be much left to say. Or the facilitator will have found out quite a lot of stuff that might need some correction by the time we get to the facilitator, and they can sort of ask some more probing questions about why things happened the way they happened, why they went well, and why people think they went well. The next step then is to go to learners and ask what went less well, and what would they do differently next time. That can be discussed as a group, again, as what went less well. Sometimes people, you know, and I tend to bring, as a facilitator, my observations in next, particularly if things, there might be if you sense the group could be hypercritical, that might not be terribly a positive learning experience for the people who are directly involved, particularly if things didn't go so good. But again, it's reducing the talking time of the facilitator. And again, we're getting back to the end of the final step of Gibbs in his reflective cycle by summarising the goals or the outcomes, the achievement of the objectives or learning outcomes, and developing a plan as to where to from here. So what are people going to take away specifically from this experience and apply in their future practice? We might just go to the next one, JB, please. So we might just open that up to discussion then at this point. There's been quite a lot of content and talking points in there. I'd be really interested in people's questions.
Well, Jason's got a question about is the plus delta like rational leads to decision? I'm sorry, that's not a frame I know.
Yeah, I'm not either. Jason, can you explain this a little bit more? I'm not familiar with it. We might, if Jason's able to either chat or pop something in the chat, we'll respond to that. Yeah, I'm not sure about that one. Todd, some health workers are so familiar with pendulums they don't hear what went well and just bracing themselves for what they didn't go so well. Sure. What can we do there? What's some strategies to work to recognize? I think what's happening is really important, isn't it? Because as a facilitator, you can get so wrapped up in the anxiety of trying to actually facilitate the debrief that you don't read the room and see what's happening. So, you know, with your experience and your over the years for this, Todd, what's your strategies?
I think you need to pick, and so this is what's really hard when you're a novice debriefer. You need to pick bits and pieces of all of the models and apply a little bit for that one and a little bit for that person and a little bit for this. So the jaded person in the room, I wouldn't even go near a Pendleton because I'll see it coming and they're just bracing themselves. So I tend to sometimes start with a bit of so the plus delta being I've taken the notes, but I'm going to ask the question, use appreciative inquiry and try and draw out of the audience what was the plus and what was the delta by using appreciative inquiry. Yep. It's a long way around, but they get to say it. So you've got to cache your question really carefully about, you know, help me try and understand. I saw you did this, but I didn't quite get it. What was that about? And I know full well what the answer was, but I want you to come around. I'm bringing you around the long way because I want the words to come out of your mouth. Yep. So I've had people, you know, looking at me and tapping clocks and all sorts of things to try and hurry it up. But sometimes you've got to go slow and sometimes you've got to draw it out the long way. It depends on the audience, but if you see somebody who's a bit jaded in the crowd and they're bracing themselves for a plus delta, I'll try and stay right away from it because they know it's coming.
Yeah, sure. And it's sometimes with and it requires a lot of skill to be able to do that, doesn't it? To be able to know where you want to go and take people with you and recognize the audience that you're playing to. So some strategies possibly around that, and what I'm hearing you say and earlier today is the opportunity to use maybe co-debriefing or some strategies like that, where you can pair up novices with more experienced people to either first observe, but then also get then, you know, co-facilitate as well, so people can get to try some things out, but they've still got a safety net of the more experienced person there, because it's a very scary experience being a facilitator, even when you're experienced and the whole thing's going a bit wrong, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the trick to being a novice debriefer is often people work in isolation. So who do you role model off?
Yeah.
You know, you need to co-debrief with somebody, you know, when you feel confident, they put you in as the lead debrief, and then, you know, your mentor is the second debrief. and you give each other the secret wink or whatever it is that you do, so that you know when to hand it over. And you complement each other. You don't debrief the same things, but complement. So it's sometimes just a little bit tricky.
Yeah, good, beautiful points. Now I can see that Jason was pumped. So Jason, in terms of your comments of justification for actions, so you're seeking to understand, so your comment is that we're seeking to understand why people did what they did. Yeah. And isn't that really, really important? Because if we kind of go back to that thing, if people do what we think that they're doing, well, we're barking up the wrong tree, isn't it? It's like, it could be that they do things beautifully, but they don't actually know why they're doing it that way, or what the alternatives are, or why it's right or why it's not so right. And at the same point in time, if people aren't necessarily aware of, we don't understand what people's knowledge gaps are or their skills gaps are, it makes it very difficult to correct that as a facilitator, because that's ultimately what our job is to help people recognize those deficits, understand why they're deficits, and understand what we can try to do to overcome those. So yeah, that's a really, really absolutely what we're talking about. Yeah.
Here now. Okay.
Right, Elyssebeth, did you? So I'm just looking at.
Yes, if you can stop sharing.
Yep.
Daniela's got a question there about appreciative inquiry.
Yep.
Oh.
I didn't see that. What can you see the question, Todd?
Yeah,
it's advocacy inquiry.
Advocacy inquiry, yeah.
Here, thoughts about appreciative inquiry.
No, it's not appreciative, it's advocacy.
Advocacy, yeah.
So can you explain, who's this? Danielle, could you explain a bit more, please?
Oh, I may have got the terminology wrong, sorry. What's the one where you have to give the opinion, where you start with the opinion, where I observed,
advocacy inquiry,
and then you open up the discussion by giving your thoughts about what you saw.
Do you have 4 days to discuss that? I mean, like, it's a 4 day course.
Yeah. So it's
then
also
at the end you can't do anything but that. You know, it's a disaster.
It's termed, a sort of nickname for it, I guess, is debriefing with good judgment. So, in some areas you say it's the role of the facilitator is impartial, they're objective, all the rest. Yes. But there is also an understanding that the person who's a debriefer, quite often, not always, but should really have a pretty good idea of practice and what's required and those things. Otherwise, you can't quite debrief the same way. So you're quite right, Daniela. The advocacy inquiry model is providing an advocacy statement. So that is using, it is implicitly stating your opinion or your professional judgment. So yeah, I noticed that you stood there looking at the patient monitor as it was alarming, and you were there for about 45-60 seconds and didn't really respond. I'm interested to know what was going on, what was happening for you during that time. So it's alerting someone that something's not right. I noticed that you did this, or I'm interested in to understand what was happening. And that inquiry part is really, I think the structure is quite nice, because it keeps the facilitator in that line of inquiry rather than being critical. So it is quite a nice model in that sense. My sense is it works. You need to have some experience, some pretty good experience with debriefing to be able to do that effectively, or it can go on. I think was it Andrew that said you couldn't have how many days have you got to talk about that? But it can work really, really well, and it may work for more experienced practitioners. I think, again, for some early undergrads, it's not a great model, because they just haven't got the discipline-specific knowledge, they haven't got the fundamental stuff wrapped up, and they haven't had the experience to practice yet that is required for that, because it does require people, and they may not have had the experience with simulation either, to have the confidence to respond to some of those things. They might see it as an opportunity or being challenged, and a loss of face is a strong possibility. So all of these things have pros and cons.
In a postgrad world, it works pretty well. They know when they've done something wrong. They absolutely know. It's how you cachet the question that they don't lose face in front of others. and that there's no right and wrong answer to what the question is. I'm just trying to understand. So I'm coming in with absolutely no judgment. Translate, there's a judgment happening behind, but you don't see it. But I've been in a situation where I was with a junior debriefer, and she, wanted to call the voice of God, and she wanted to jump in, and this is really wrong, and blah, blah, blah. But we took the long way around and asked why he kept trying to put the Goodell's airway back in, despite the fact that the mannequin was speaking at that point. And the reality was, he said, yeah, I think I could have taken it out earlier, but I was in a situation once where we took it out and then the airway closed over. So he knew that it should have come out, but he was being super cautious because he'd been burnt before by an airway that closed over. And everyone just backed off and left him alone then. No one was judging him. It was a fair response to a previous experience.
It's great, isn't it? It does open up that inquiry, and it's also, I quite like it from the sense that, for myself personally, because I'm not the sort of person that can ask, what were you thinking, without sounding really accusatory. So I cannot ask that question in any way, shape or form. It never comes out right. So, the inquiry statement or those stems work really well for me.
I think it's that whole, you don't need to guess what I'm thinking. I'm going to tell you what I'm thinking, and I'd like to know if I'm thinking or observed what I observed, or if something else happened. And I agree with Todd, for postgraduate, for clinicians, it's sort of a respectful way to sort of unfold or uncover what may or may not have occurred, because what you're seeing as well might be different to how it was experienced. But then I guess it also then takes you to the next level of really trying to understand sort of why they did what they did, or why it unfolded the way it unfolded, in order to then understand.
Or get them to bring out that prior experience, such as the one Todd described.
Yeah, and what the gap might be, how you might want to then sort of fill that if it's needed. Yeah.
Good one.
Thanks, Daniela.
Good question.
On the same day, we had this situation where this junior educator questioned the patient breathing spontaneously from an IMV bag. They were just holding the IMV bag, and the patient's breathing spontaneously. They must have a rebreathing mask. And I said, oh, well, Anyway, there was a room full of recovery nurses there, and I went, look, I don't know anything about recovery or whatever. But when the patients come back from recovery and they're breathing, or just after you extubate somebody, you instantly whip on one of those masks. I went, oh, no way, it could go backwards at any point in time. So just by asking that question, and then the theatre nurses answering it, I've saved face for this junior educator. And she's like, oh, okay, get it from the experts. I'm not the expert. So openly and honestly, I will share that I know nothing about this. So I come with no idea about dressings or anaesthetics or paediatrics, and instantly I don't become threatening.
It might be a point for a story. I have a colleague who was a very, very junior police officer and under a cloud, so not allowed to do public-facing duties, but was also an army commando in the reserves. So he was tasked with designing a major search and rescue episode down on the Shoalhaven River. So he sat in command headquarters down there with all the radios and that, and listened as everything that could go wrong did go wrong. One of the senior officers fell and broke an arm. They lost a boat. Radio equipment got broken. Things weren't where they were supposed to be. It just went from disaster to disaster. And he's sitting up there in the control room, knowing the cloud hanging over him, knowing his junior status, and wondering how on earth he was going to debrief this. And what he did always led me to admire him, because by the time they all got back, bedraggled and wet and angry and that, he had all the chairs set up for the debriefing in a circle facing a whiteboard, and he was sitting in front of the whiteboard. And on the whiteboard, he wrote in very large letters, I am fully responsible. I accept full responsibility for everything that happened. And they all sat down and looked at it, and then looked at him. And of course, what they then had to talk about was what happened. There was no point in sort of throwing bombs or anything. But I mean, to do that was an extraordinarily brave thing. And yet in hindsight, probably the best possible thing that he could have done, because he shifted the focus off himself and onto the process and then onto the expertise they needed to build to make sure that in real time, things like that didn't happen. You know, it's just sometimes when things go wrong, you just got to face up and say it went wrong.
Indeed.
Yeah, and I'm gonna. I hope this doesn't go wrong next.
Yeah, I think we should jump into it, Elyssebeth, or we're going to be
Yeah.
running out of time. Yeah.
I'm going to. I have now shared my screen. I have now put a. I'm about to put a timer on. You have 30 seconds to complete to follow these instructions, please.
And come back with how you would do it. That's the idea, right? So think about
Yeah.
it, and then we have to come back and say how we would do it.
Once you've finished, or once you've got your solution, we're going to put you into breakout rooms, please, Christina. I'll give you the tip in a minute. Right, that is 30 seconds. So now, Christina, would you open the breakout rooms, please? You have a choice to go into the rooms for everyone. If you can, please try and keep them fairly even. Your question is, how did you address the issue? Did you get a solution? Please share your solutions. How did you go about doing this? The breakout rooms will only be for 4 minutes, please, Christina.
Yeah, no
Right,
problem.
we
Sure.
can set them to go now. For JB and Steve, we don't have to join the rooms. Yeah, we just click not now.
Oh, okay.
I said 3 minutes, so I will. Did I say 3 minutes? Yes.
I think you said 4. Doesn't matter. That's fine.
Alright.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's for Christina's benefit. She'll need to know how to sort of run the. So I
Right.
said 4 minutes.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if that'll be too long. JB
Yeah.
and Steve, would you just like to briefly visit the rooms and see how they're going? See if just ask, is 4 minutes too long? So JB, you can join a breakout room. So JB, if you join breakout room 1, and Steve, if you go to room 2,
Okay.
and just check, did I give them too long?
Yeah, I reckon 3 minutes would do it, but I would.
Well, let's ask. Yeah, and I'll stay in the main room.
Okay. How do I get out again, though?
You just
Out.
sorry,
Sorry.
you explain.
You can choose to go out. There's going to be at the bottom a button in your control panel that says leave breakout room or go back to main room.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Just don't go out of the whole call.
Right. Got it.
Okay. All right. You've got the clock on, Christina?
Yep. 3 minutes, correct?
Yeah. Well, we'll see when JB and Steve came back. It just depends on how talkative the group are as to whether 3 minutes is enough, because they're going to have to figure out who's in the room and what their solutions were. And no matter what time I give them, it's either not going to be enough or too much. There's no perfect time.
Okay.
So
So we've done 1.5 minutes.
Okay.
And then
right.
there's just though it will give them when I end the breakout room, it will
Yeah,
give
let's
them
give them
60
60
seconds.
So JB, what was the answer? No, you're on mute.
Yeah, we said 3 minutes should be plenty.
Right. Okay. Well, Christina, you
Just
can.
make it 3 minutes and cut it back. Yeah, that's it.
Right.
Yeah, because it's
Did they
almost.
have any solutions, JB? Did you get in there?
I think there was a fair bit of discussion, robust discussion happening, so that's good. And there was something thoughts about being sneaky. I heard the word sneaky.
Of course it is.
Yes.
But that's the whole point.
Exactly. So I think I'm going to jump, Elyssebeth. I'm wondering whether we just leave out the planning and preparation and just jump.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm gonna close the breakout rooms now.
Okay, so they've got 60 seconds. This will take a little while to debrief.
Yeah.
And yes, I think.
Or we'll just do the one slide each of those ones, and that's it.
Okay.
Planning, one slide, preparation, one slide.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, Jason and Belinda are back. Adam and Tane. Okay, Todd. All right. Did Jawahar tells me he heard the word sneaky in there somewhere. So, what solutions were there? Oh, Jason said there were some inventive responses. Okay.
Can we get the instructions again? I think I misheard the instructions.
I think that's a great excuse.
I can share the screen. So there it is in writing.
I think you heard them perfectly well, Todd.
What did you think you heard, Todd?
I'd see it said reproduce this without lifting your pen from paper.
Yeah.
I used a mouse. I didn't use pen or paper at all. So I misread it. There you go.
Ah, no. So what do you mean? You drew it with your mouse?
With the
yeah,
mouse.
I just opened up Word and did a circle with a dot in it.
Well
Yeah,
done.
same.
Well, there
That's
you
what
go.
I did.
Okay, so there's two. What about other people? Jason?
I used 2 pieces of paper.
Yes.
I drew the circle and then went on to my piece of paper and then worked it into the middle and then drew.
Yes.
Well done. Well done.
And I think I've done this
you,
many moons ago, and then I had to recall thinking, how did I do this? But yeah.
Yep, that's great. So that recall issue is a really interesting one. But the idea of moving the piece of paper, I'm going to add that to my list. Jason and Andrew, Siobhan, Nanako, Alexander, what solutions did you come up with, if any, or how did you go? Jason snipped the screen. Oh, yes, took a screenshot. Yes. Daniela, Alexander, Andrew, what did you guys do? No, they're off.
Here we go.
Yeah. Andrew, what did you do? No, you.
Everyone, I think when you guys have been talking, pretty much it's kind of. I don't want to like unmute. It's not my tip of my thumb to unmute. I'm sorry, so I apologize. Yeah, well, I just thought it would be easy to just like roll the pen across the paper, without touching. But anyway, yes. I don't know. I missed the point, so I just drew a circle.
No.
I rolled the pen without touching the paper, and then lifted the pen up and then put a dot. But yes. I didn't. Yeah.
So
it seemed to work.
It did, and it does. Lots of absolutely effective solutions. But what was your very first reaction to it? So I'm in debriefing mode at the moment.
What's the point? What is the point of this exercise?
That's your response. Oh, I got a story about that. Okay, I'll hold the story for a minute. Good question. Tane, what was your response?
My response was, how quickly can I open up Word and what does it look like? And I've stopped paying attention to what the instructions were. I just want to get it done. I'm going to do it.
Okay. Andy, what about you?
Where's the trick? Because there's normally a trick.
There is definitely a trick. And Belinda?
Mine was, thank goodness I've just had a coffee so I can think fast.
Right. Okay. Well, let me, and Siobhan removed the ink cartridge, bent in the middle, and so she took the ink cartridge out of the pen, bent it in the middle, one end in the middle, and then put the bent end on page and turned the paper 360 degrees. Yes, I now have 3 solutions to add to my 30 existing solutions.
Wow.
Thank you very much. So let me share the screen and I'll show you. It is a trick, and it's a trick that's excellent for language, for communication, for understanding. The sentence looks absolutely unbreakable, but in fact, every element in that sentence can be broken. It's the key is in how they're put together. So you've all figured out different ways of reproducing it. And reproducing seems to be the word that makes it impossible. Take a screenshot, you've done it, you've reproduced it. So it's around understanding that. Other solutions that I've got people write the word this without lifting their pen from the paper. They've met the solution. Because the this implies a reference to the dot and the circle. There's no arrow saying I only mean that image. Other people have written the whole sentence without lifting their pen from the paper. So the key in an exercise like this is that it's about helping people to learn that their individual assumptions produced by words can actually have a terribly inhibiting effect on their learning. That's all the activity was about. When I first encountered it, there was only one solution, which was pretty much like Belinda's. Fold a piece of the paper in, do the dot, draw out on the piece of paper, go around, flip the corner off and complete the circle. Using a moving piece of paper, which you did, Belinda, even that wasn't offered. The first time I played this was with a group of doctors with Commonwealth Health, and one of them, this will tell you how long ago, one of them had the brand fangled new click pen, the only one in the room, and he clicked his pen and drew it out, and we had to have a big discussion about did that meet the criteria. And as soon as we did as soon as we agreed that, it broke open. Now I've had one student who refused to accept that the phrase "the pen" meant anything other than the point where the ink is. And as far as he was concerned, you could not create that without lifting the point where the ink is off the paper. So all of the other solutions offered were not valid for him, and his peers were unable to shift him. So for me, it's the most incredible example of a mindset that was just locked in. But so it's a quick activity. I wanted to play it now because I would like to ask you, of all the debriefing methods and things, how would you debrief? Well, assuming you've chosen that activity as something to help people look at the issues I've raised, how would you debrief it? What kinds of processes or things might you? And it goes to Andrew's question about what is this activity about? So how would you debrief it? Give me the where would you use the activity, and then how would you debrief it? Where would you use the context? Anybody got any ideas? I'm really conscious of time. I don't want to push you. Shall I tell my story and take the heat off?
I reckon tell the story, Elyssebeth.
Okay.
In the afternoon. Yes.
I used this activity when I was running a workshop for CMOS several years ago. Although everybody in the room was in civies, I knew that most of them were military personnel. I didn't know their rank. And I was using this activity to do pretty much what I did with you, to explore how words can have different meanings and how you have to arrive at a process of shared understanding through discussion. I put it up on the board before afternoon tea, and it had been a pretty hostile session. There were lots of pricklies in the room. I came back in after the break, sat down, and one guy sitting in the middle of the room really challenged me. Do you think an activity like this is relevant to what I'm doing? I mean, you can hear all the words I left out, I hope. And he hooked me so badly that I actually advanced down the room towards him, and about halfway down, I thought, hang on a minute, what's going on here? He really hooked me in because he was so angry. This was not relevant to him. And I got to standing over him and I said, well, who are your learners? And I'd had murderous intentions towards the guy who was the commanding officer for the Special Air Services group. And it was sort of like, not a good thing to be sort of attacking murderous intent. So he explained this, and I pointed out to him that if he was sending serving personnel into Afghanistan where nothing would be as they expected, they would need to understand that nothing would be as they expected, and that this was an activity where they had to challenge internally all of their expectations, that the solution to the problem was quite simple, but that in fact, the barrier for them would be their own assumptions about what was happening. And he kind of looked at me, and I told him this story. several years ago, Swiss Air used to fly a route from Zurich into Ghana, the capital of Ghana, and then another 1-hour flight to the other major city in Ghana, and then do a turnaround in that city and back to overnight in the capital. They landed, took off again, landed in the secondary city, and when they came back on board, the steward said to the captain, "We've got a problem. We have no toilet paper." Now you can't, there are lots of things you can't fly a plane without, and I got to tell you, toilet paper for the passengers is one of them. He wasn't even going to be able to fly the plane for that 1-hour flight back to the capital. So what did he do? And I asked this very senior military officer, what would you do? And he was flummoxed. Now, it happened that the guy, the pilot of that plane was in the room. That's why I knew the story. And what he did was take off that night. And this, we're talking probably early 90s, so no direct communication back to the aircrew waiting for the plane. So he went back, radio control to Zurich, and said, tell the crew they need to get toilet paper, however and wherever they can. Take it from your hotel rooms, buy what you can. If you do not come on board with toilet paper, you're not going back to Zurich. So by the time they got, back to the capital, the crew was there with all the toilet paper, and they could conclude the flight. The toilet paper had been stolen in the secondary city by the cleaning staff. So what I wanted to make clear, and what I used that activity and then the story to do, was to help that commander and everybody else in the room understand that when you are dealing with what looks like an absolutely certain statement, and if I put it back up, it looks like, it's totally impossible. If you examine it and also examine your own assumptions, and in a debriefing process, draw out from people what were you assuming, and then help them explore how can they break down that assumption, then they've got an opportunity to really rethink their own thinking. So Andrew, that's why I use that activity. Other solutions to that, just if you're curious, it says your pen. Well, you put your pen on the paper and pick somebody else's up. You've got all the, so you can find a dot on a piece of paper and draw a circle around it, find a circle and put a dot in the middle. Somebody, and I can't show you, but if you can imagine a circle with a dot up at the top corner. So not in the sun, but so this person drew a circle and then put a dot up on the circle where he joined up the lines. And when we asked why, he said, well, look, it's obvious. It's a navel orange, and I've just tipped a navel orange on its side. There's the navel. It's now on the side, not in the center. Again, we had a discussion. Does that fit the criteria? So you're breaking, you put up impossibles, and then you help people check their own assumptions. So just an activity. And that's how I debriefed it once. There are lots, I can share the activity with you. There are lots of ways to debrief it. All those methods that Stephen walked us through would work for that. Again, as long as you know why you did it in the first place. So that's just an activity to break it up, but also for you to be thinking about debriefing's a place where you can tell stories. It's a place where you can let other people have all the space, or as today, as I've had more than usual, take up more than. I'm wondering what Andrew's research would say about how the numbers counted on my debrief. Yeah, any questions, comments, feedback, please. It's not in the PowerPoint, but I can certainly, can I put it in the chat? Yes, I'll put the exercise in the chat for you at the end if we have, because I've got one more if we have time. JB, back to you.
Okay, so I'm just going to, I'm going to share screens. We're probably going to jump a bit here, but let's see how we go. Where's the screen? Right. Any day now, should be coming up. Does that come through okay?
Yep, it's fine.
All right, so we're going to move ahead a bit in this one, and we're going to move into conduct, tools, and technologies. And I might want to get Steve, if you're around, to talk about de-rolling.
No, that was me.
Oh, that was you. I'll go for Elyssebeth.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think this is a really important thing, and we debated about where to put it in the process of talking through processes of debriefing. And for me, it has to come really early. If you've put people into a simulation where they have been in role of any kind, it's vital that you help them step out of that role. What I heard somebody yesterday call safe transfer from the container back into the real world, which is another word for de-rolling. Particularly if people have been in roles where they've experienced anxiety or intensive engagement, because the degree to which de-rolling becomes significant is related to all of these things: the level of anxiety and interpersonal feeling. I learned this the hard way. I ran a game that involved people getting into role. One man took on the role of a grandma. To be a grandma, he got a stole from a dress-up box and wrapped it around himself and spent his whole time wailing and bemoaning his fate. When we finished the activity, he moved into the debriefing phase, still wailing and bemoaning his fate with the scarf, with the wrap on. That was when I learned very fast. I got everybody to stand up, and they'd had labels and various other props. I got them to throw them all in the center of the debriefing circle, walk once around the circle and go back to their seat. Only then was that man able to step out of the role of being grandma and back into his role of being the class lecturer. I was a student in the class. So that anxiety and interpersonal feeling can be so intense, you've actually got to do something physical. It's related to the immersion in the role, and can be particularly strong if the role was one they were told to do rather than voluntarily selected. So it comes before everything else in the debriefing. Do never, ever do a debriefing while the participants are still in role. There might be occasions where you want to do that. If there are, they're very specific, but for general purposes, don't begin debriefing until you've de-rolled. That's why that one's sitting there. And people have got questions or other experiences, I'd love to hear from them, but it's a pretty strong injunction for me.
Sometimes if you're going from, one scenario to another, and you're running the same scenario with a second group, but you have to be in the debrief for the first group, it doesn't take much to de-roll in that you rip off some of the gear and you throw a gown over the top. It doesn't take much.
Sure.
And when you're speaking about that character that you were playing, it's in the third person.
Always in the third person. Yeah. Thanks, Todd. Totally agree. Yeah. It's just this guy was so deeply immersed. And I mean, that was called learning on the run and learning in public in a big way, because it was part of my assessment process for that particular course. Okay. No other comments? JB, next slide then.
Yep, I'm going to keep going. Here we go. So we're on the home straight almost, so just hanging there just a bit longer. So we've sort of got 10 sort of key areas to consider in the conduct of debriefing, and they're fairly obvious, but really the introduction at the start, the why, what, and how, laying down the ground rules, the safety aspect is not about picking on anyone, all of that stuff. It's about learning, about expanding. The importance of facilitation, that I think that's really come across in the discussions and the feedback all the way through, how the fundamental role of facilitation to make sure, first of all, that the focus of the debrief is on reflection, but also then bringing in different individuals depending on their particular styles to make sure that everyone gets involved and engaged, and towards that, improving that common understanding, lifting that common understanding and expansion for everyone as you go through this. Looking at what was intended versus what actually happened as a framework to establish that, the number of methodologies that Steve walked through, that give you that means to that end. The key points that come out of it, again, those techniques that Steve mentioned, you know, the plus deltas, the penton, or you know, the four pillar framework that we've touched on a few times. The flexibility aspect is you know, going with the flow, understanding the participants' roles that they're playing, helping, you know, bringing them, getting involved. It's flexibility is almost fundamental to this whole thing. Making sure that there's closure at the end, where, you know, where things are actually closed out effectively. We talked about re-rolling just then, but really, you know, what are the key outcomes as well that need to come out of this? And depending on the formality of it, you know, capturing that in some sort of a report, or whatever form that might take, so that you've got some objective measures that came out of this that you can then take forward for further improvement. I'm sensitive to time, but Elyssebeth or Steve, do you want to add anything more in terms of the conduct of a debrief?
Just something on the visuals. If I was observing the debriefing instructor, who I'm assuming is the bloke with the stick in his hand, I would make the following observations. Ditch the stick. Stand people in a circle where everyone can see everyone else. There are at least 3 people in that room for whom he has not got direct eyesight, and the number then increases when you look at where all the participants are. They cannot see each other. Therefore, when they're talking about the process, they cannot directly connect. So in that visual, I'd sort of do that what's wrong with this picture exercise. And they're the things I'd pick. I'd also wonder why they were standing, why they've got their weapons. Yeah, the stick is threatening. It's theatrical, and I know it's a military frame, but you know, I do understand the military is changing a bit. So in terms of conducting a debrief, going in reverse, then you have to be in a position where you can see everyone and be seen by everybody. Everybody else has to be in a position where they can see everyone and be seen by everybody. They need to be comfortable and ensure that they are not intruding on anybody else's comfort zone. There need to be no unnecessary visual cues that are going to be distracting. Yeah, so they're the key things I'd say. Following on, like, I agree with all the key points, but that image raises all those issues for me about setting and context. Steve, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I was just going to type in there and say, it is interesting, isn't it? Debriefing in the actual setting where the activity took place can be a real issue, because people will inadvertently, 2 things, facilitator, I've seen a facilitator will tend to start teaching and pick up where the simulation left off, or repeat the whole thing, or students will start fiddling with stuff and get distracted. So yeah, it is. But if there is a purpose to doing the debrief in the setting, then again, that comes down to planning. So I think the planning part, the design part is probably the biggest take-home message in here. And you can see through those 10 principles there, all the key areas of focus. Each of those has a component to them that requires thought in terms of planning and intentional planning as to who are the participants, what's the scenario, what's the overall purpose of this, and then you get to the, you know, what are the objectives and the outcomes, and how are we going to do it. So I think that's probably all. I think they're very good points, actually, JB, and maybe if it was possible, there are, for everyone here, there's a stack of slides that go on behind these that are we okay with sharing those with people afterwards, because I think there is a breakdown of each of these, which is really helpful.
Yeah, we've got way too many slides, but yes, we can share them. We got like, so each of these things breaks down into a slide individually. Yeah, that's right.
We've got a book here.
I got a bit carried away with it.
The manual.
Yeah, I was going to actually add that you reminded me, actually, this image actually is yes, it actually picks up on so many things that are wrong as opposed to right. You know, I think.
But it's a good one. It's a good visual for that, because it sort of helps prompt us when we look around. to
right.
to
It's
think
about
about what
telling, right, as opposed to doing,
Yeah.
right. It's about telling. And you can see, I mean, the expression that Todd made, you know, sage on the stage, sort of that comes across really
well and
clearly.
truly clear there. Yeah.
Telling them this is how it's done, right? Yeah, everyone's just sort of, okay, yeah, we'll do it that way then. So yeah, so that's that one. I'm going to move on to the next.
JB, can I just add though? I think, you know, and what the really nice thing in that photo, and I like Todd's comment about the stick and the guns and all the rest. It comes down to context, doesn't it? I mean, each different disciplines. No, I'm not justifying it, but different disciplines have different norms and conventions. And the thing I like about this forum today and forums like this is that we start to understand the history and the conventions of different professionals. I've run courses where we've had registrars involved, and they will debrief in a very particular way. It'll be a very, you know, it'll be a talk through. It'll be an explanation of what happened, and even running simulations. It runs very differently to some other disciplines where it's basically pop people in. You've got the, you know, people in various roles, and people have to actually search for the information and the data that they're looking for, the findings that they're looking for, rather than being told by the facilitator who's standing on the side and will just give people the information that they need. So I think, again, it's understanding that there's difference, understanding why there's difference, and also considering where we want to take a particular practice and a style of practice from, and where we could possibly take it to. You know, I've been fortunate to work with a couple of people who work in simulation in the Navy, and there are certain aspects that will not change, or will not change easily.
Change easily.
And you know, it's very, very difficult to action some of these things that we've been talking about, because that's just not A, how it's done and how people have seen it done, and therefore B, not the participants. You know, these guys standing around staring at the ground, looking at each other, someone's in the background doing something else. You know, that can be very difficult to change. And why would you want to change it, and what would you like to change it to? So I think that's the cultural part of practice, isn't it? That's also very interesting and very.
I have a friend who's working. Sorry, after you, Todd.
I was just going to add about context. Maybe it is appropriate that they're standing. I mean, I know that we do stand-up meetings, and that encourages it not to last long. So maybe this was intended to be a super short debrief. Don't get comfortable. It's a military thing, though they say the Navy's down here, and it's why stand when you can sit, and why sit when you can lay down, because you don't know when you're going to get another break, you know, sort of military thinking. So, you know, maybe there's a reason for that. We just don't understand it because we're coming with different eyes. Don't know.
Yeah, good point. Well, I have a friend who's working on shifting some of the mindsets in the Australian military, army anyway. But yes, the conversation just raises all those issues, and I'm reminded of that whole issue of situational awareness. You need to be aware of your context and respond to it appropriately.
Indeed. Right, I'm going to move to the next one. So we talk about debriefing and after action route technologies. We have to keep in mind that the technology can be used, is an enabler, but also in a sense might be a facilitator in that regard, depending on the context again, and you know what the intent is, the formality and all of that stuff. But it never eliminates the need for instructor facilitator preparation or careful observation during the session, because you've got to be in there flexibly, picking up on nuances, picking up on expressions, and all of those things from the body language and what's going on, to actually focus and facilitate to get it right. Technology really is there as an enabler to reduce instructor workload. It's to provide a means to support the end in that regard. And really we've come a long way in terms of that technology, especially so in the defense side of things. It's there, you know, to provide an objective basis for comment. You know, I'm not just making this up, but you know, there's the data that shows this is what happened. So that it's not like you're picking on anyone. It's being unbiased. It's based on what the data says, and it provides a set of props that you can use to support the debrief. You know, you can go back and look at the data and follow through on it and say, you know, see what happened. This is what we did. This is what the action was, and here's what came out of it, and this is what the state of the system was as we were going through it. I'll keep going a couple more slides very quickly, and then we'll sort of have a bit of a video thing. So some of the functionality that typically debrief systems need to have. I mean, primarily it's about collecting data through the conduct of the training session, the simulation, and the things that you might want to collect. You might want to capture trainees' actions, literally video capture of trainees' actions, see what was going on. System states, what were the conditions that the system was in, and how did it move between states? What caused the change in the states? The audio and video, obviously, what was going on. And instructor event markers, for the instructor to be able to, through the exercise as it's happening, to sort of make timestamps or highlight or put flags in along the way, so that you can come back to this when you're doing the debrief, when they pick up on particular instances. So for example, when they introduce a particular scenario or introduce a particular situation, you might mark that in the timeline, so you can come back to it and say, see, we introduced that situation there, and this is how it then replayed, and how events sort of eventuated, and then examine them objectively to see what we could learn, what did we do wrong, what could we have done better. And clearly the technology enables all of this and allows all of it to be correlated in time, so you can link things together. You can do searches on time and be able to find things. You need data recording facilities, then obviously the replay and display elements of it. And sometimes you might want to have, within a particular scenario, you might just want to stop for a second and say, right, let's just stop there. Let's just relook at what we just did, and then reset and start again from that point in time, instead of waiting for the whole exercise to come out. So it doesn't just have to be at the end of the session. You can have little mini debriefs during a scenario as well to pick up on things. But typically it's done after the session. And at the bottom of here is just a bit of an iconic graphic that says, the types of things, and in terms of the terminology, there's some software you want to record audio and video, and there's an instructor operator station. That's the term that's typically used in defense, the IOS, the instructor operator station, where the instructor's got the ability to control what's happening in the scenario, and to be able to insert timestamps to flags and anything else basically that they would like to be able to come back to from a debrief perspective. So there's some sort of a data acquisition and recording application that happens that stores that data, and it might store it for the current session, but also have an archive. You can look back at past scenarios that you might have done. Then you typically conduct the debrief in a particular area. It might just very well be the same area where you conducted the exercise, but typically to get functionality, you need to have some other piece of kit that will give you that functionality, whatever that might be. And then you might need to have some sort of a visual repeater that you can see what was going on and watch it, in the context of the whole scenario or a part of that scenario, to be able to convert to as a reference. Now, picture says 1,000 words, so we have a sort of linked a video over here, and Andy Bowd's the company where this comes from, and I just thought it's quite actually appropriate, and given Andy was going to be here, I thought we'd use that. So we'll pick on Andy's brains after this, but anyone feel free to come in. So here we go. So I'm going to play this. Just tell me again if the sound's coming through or not. So I'll just play and stop for a second.
Yep, I can hear a bird. Yeah, it's fine.
Through? Okay, I shall just, there we go, start again.
There are moments when you can't afford to make mistakes. The rapid evolution of technology demands innovative adaptation. In order to make better decisions, you need to observe, communicate, adapt, and act. This requires access to as much information as possible. With VADAR 2, VADAR 2 is used for training and simulation applications across a variety of markets. From defense to emergency management and education, VADAR 2's diverse application capabilities and straightforward usage create limitless opportunities. VADAR 2 is scalable software that allows you to stream, record, and review video, audio, and data from any number of devices anywhere in the world. Capture data from computer monitors, wall displays, cameras, audio, and network traffic to stream and record. Then view your combined collection of sources, all time synchronized on any device with VADAR 2's easy-to-use interface. With simple installation and use of your existing IT infrastructure, Vadar 2 provides the access you need to achieve your operational goals. Vadar 2 expands the technical dimensions of command and control with the ability to monitor live or view recorded sources from computers, IP cameras and data, regardless of location. Whether it's being used in training or in operations, Vadar 2 is an invaluable tool for after-action review. Play, fast forward, rewind, and frame step recordings from multiple sources with perfect synchronization to allow for precise understanding of an action. Enhance teachable moments while debriefing by adding bookmarks with notes to highlight and review critical decision-making points. Cybersecurity is important now more than ever. Vadar 2 allows you to centrally manage user settings and resource access controls to custom fit your security needs. Vadar 2 supports multiple video, audio, and data types. You can record distributed interactive simulation packets or any other UDP data from your preferred simulation software. Vadar 2 gives you the capability to see the true picture by comparing users' perceived truth with what was presented to them and how they reacted to it. No matter the application, Vadar 2 goes beyond boundaries to deliver a whole new world of visual, audio, and data capabilities. Take control with Vadar 2.
Wow.
Yes, so there we go. So that was, oops, I got to get past this number. Okay, here we go. So I'm just going to go.
So my questions, Andy, are always about the why. How do you help people understand? There is so much in what that offers. How do you get down to the basics of helping people understand how technology like that can assist in the debriefing? Not that I'm throwing a small question at you.
Oh yeah, I think JB basically said it's an enabler because there's lots of things going on. Typically, in a lot of those environments, we're capturing maybe 30 or 40 different participants, all within a training environment, and obviously one person's action can potentially affect somebody else's action. To have a single instructor or a single SME, subject matter expert, capture all of that is very, very hard to see. So we can capture all of that data all at once, both video, audio, and data. So that's the, I guess that's the product why. And really what we're just trying to do is to get down to why people made their decisions. And that's really for the facilitator and the debriefer to actually focus in on. So we're just a technology platform, and that's, I guess, some of my points and some of the things that I picked up today is the facilitation of the human and the individual is more important than the technology.
Yes, I agree. I think the technology can be hugely supportive. I've worked with a social worker who's been, I don't know whether she's using yours, but that kind of thing to enable her social work students to study and review their own approaches to interviewing and counselling skills. So yes, I can see all of that. And I see another whole layer of learning for the facilitator. You know, not only does it change how we would need to operate, it will change what we need to know about it. So it opens, I mean, it's fascinating. I'm intrigued. It opens up a huge area of,
I mean, one of the key points that I see is everybody talks about artificial intelligence and all those types of things, but when you're doing really complicated training exercises with lots of people involved, somebody still may do something fairly well, but not necessarily perfectly. The overall objective may be achieved, but there may be multiple learning points from multiple people all during the training exercise that don't necessarily get picked up in a what I would call an instructor observed event, because there's too much stuff going on.
Yeah.
I could say something to that. We've been using this type of technology for a long time, not this format, but Medi Learning Space, and it's an amazing tool to, like we're talking about de-rolling. When you've got a complex simulation that goes for some time and you're looking at decision points or communication, or it's very hard to remember when you're part of that team specifically what's happened, and just a 10-second snip of back into that immersive simulation has a huge effect on the debrief. It's really a powerful tool.
So Jason's saying that using a tablet record to record interactions and allow participants to review their actions. And I totally agree. But to do that, you have to give them a really good, clear framework for reflection. You can't just say, watch this and tell me what you did. Or tell me what you've learned, because they don't know what they're looking at. You know, that's another whole level of that facilitation skill, how to work out beforehand, how to help people understand what they're seeing, interpret it, link it to theory, link it forward, plan it to future practice. So what you're in the middle of, Andy, is the technology as a process for really deepening reflection. So as I said, you've got a hidden role of education there for facilitators, and a big one will be helping them to understand how to get individuals to reflect more deeply on their own. So if we go right back to Van Ripper, he was reflecting in action. He knew that things were going wrong. His command staff were actually having his orders countermanded, and initially he didn't know that. He had to go and find out. So he was doing what I would recall deep reflection in action. This is not going the way it should be. What is it? What am I missing? And some people can do that really well, and other people just see the process moving on and miss that. But if it's in the video, it's in the technology, how do you help them see it? That's, to me, that's one of the really big questions.
Even think for recurrency training, where people are doing returning training on doing the same sort of training exercises, there's no reason that you can't use some of that data captured and actually say, well, next time we're going to do a slightly different training exercise because you were good at X, Y, Z, but ABC you were lacking. Let's focus on ABC and actually start to do tailored training to the individual.
Yep. I was just looking for the person who said you can't step into the same river twice. So it doesn't matter if they're going to do the same activity again. It's not going to be the same activity.
It's right. It's going to be different. Can I maybe, I just sensitive of the time, I'm going to suggest we'll just go back. We've got just a few more slides and then we summarize, and then we'll be able to then wrap up and finish by 5, because at 5 there is the closing, right? So let's
we need to finish a couple of minutes early to be able to get across.
That's right. So there are a couple of slides that you have that I wanted to just put up quickly, Elyssebeth, for you on the Dennis Meadows stuff. So I'll just put that up and then we'll finish off wrap up summary. So I'm just going to share screens. Where are we? Here we go. So Elyssebeth, as soon as this comes through, just go for it.
Okay. One of the technology things that I find really important is working out how you're going to integrate visual feedback from an activity. This is, so I think there's only a couple here. These are visuals developed and used by Donella Meadows and Dennis Meadows, who were some of the Club of Rome people, the futures thinking people. They developed a simulation called Fish Banks. It's an analog game, but I think it might be moving into being a digital game. It's about the tragedy of the commons, and it's about how we all try to do the right thing, but collectively doing the right thing leads everyone eventually to disaster. So what they use as part of their debriefing are charts like this, the companies down the left-hand side. So I played this game and I think I was company 2, and I thought I was doing pretty well. I was growing, things weren't looking too bad. But in doing that, I was not looking at the whole picture. So if you can put the next one up, JB. What they then started to show us was the year-on-year summary of our game behavior. So they used a matrix like this. When I did it, it was in paper and they just drew it. So this is another, it's a low-tech way of scoring. So you might find that you can use diagrams like this to track. Here you were right on time for the length of time it usually takes to resuscitate a patient. And what happened here? Suddenly you drop down. So JB, the next one. So you end up with charts like this, which are visual representations over time of what happens. And I don't see a lot of simulations using this, because often if you're the solo facilitator, this is one of those times where you need at least 2 people to be tracking it. But you can see in this one, the number of ships grew, while the number of fish and the number of catch dropped to 0. And visuals like this can be immensely powerful when you're trying to run a simulation that has a lot of intangibles in it, particularly interactive intangibles. So I just wanted to say, you know, I love Andy's work, and I'd love to sort of have had the opportunity to use some of it on some of my time. But, you know, the non-tech, low-tech tracking of people's behaviors, when I saw that score and realized that I'd helped fish the fish banks dry, it was an enormously visually visceral memory, and it can really help participants see how their behavior individually okay, collectively not good. So it's just a different way of saying, think about your tools and technologies, draw it out if you need to. And if anybody wants a game that's on environmental dangers, the one that Marika and Karen ran last night, the NBanks one, is brilliant. And it does show you all of this stuff. So yeah, we're moving. For me, we're moving into different worlds. I know this has been around for a while, and the whole debriefing process has to take account of how to use all this information and use it well. So I think that's it for those 3. Maybe it was just
right. We're going to try and summarize and wrap up then, and then have any.
Yep. Okay.
Right? So sorry, I was gonna, where are we? Yeah, here we go. So just a quick summary of what we covered. So we started off with the motivation, we did Kolb's learning cycle and the learning styles. The focus really being that the whole point of After Action Review Debrief was on experiential learning. It's about reflection, understanding, essentially growing and evolving our mental models so that we learn and expand from it, but do it collectively with the group. We then went on and looked at what is and what isn't debriefing, and you know, some of the graphics that came out of that, you know, about how on the left side what it is and what it's not on the right, and how, you know, you need to adjust and you know, look at the context and appropriately adjust and make sure we don't slip off the edge, and it becomes more a telling and a doing as opposed to an actual debriefing. The 4 pronged, or the 4 questions of relevance that you might want to be considering: what happened, was supposed to happen, what why it happened, and what might be learned from this going forward. Moving on, structures, the formal and the informal. Stephen walked through the Gibbs reflective cycle and how that mapped back into the Kolb cycle as well. And again, it all depends on the context, but there are a number of these different frameworks and structures that you can apply depending on what the rule is. The idea is to have them all in your, I guess, all these arrows in your quiver, and then you decide which one's appropriate and mix and match appropriately to use the one that's most relevant. We didn't go through this in a lot of detail. This section, we actually skipped this a bit because we're running a bit behind, but the slides are there. And it sort of says when you plan in terms of planning and preparation, and, you know, 6 things to consider when you're planning for a you know, typically a formal debrief. And in terms of preparation, so once you've done all the planning, all of that, now you're preparing to conduct the debrief, the things, probably a checklist of things to do. You know, get the facilitator sorted, confirm the venue, obtain the interest and announce, and all of that stuff. So it's a framework really, or a checklist of sorts that you can use to get your preparation and planning right. And we talked about conduct and tools, you know, those 10 focus areas. And again, there's a lot of material behind this, we'll pass along. And the point of technology is the enabler. And really where technology is going now is it's providing us with a really rich means, you know, data rich means that we can then look at, that's all correlated and, you know, and connected, so that we can look at relationships between that data, look at states and start to examine that to really improve where we go with this. I think that's it. So I would maybe just stop there. I'm going to stop sharing screens, and we've got about, well, we don't want to go all the way to 5 o'clock, but we've got about, say, 5 minutes. Anyone's got any questions? Let's have a quick conversation and see anything else that you want to bring up or talk about. So I'll stop sharing now. feel free to get your cameras on and mics going and all that sort of stuff, and also be happy to get some feedback on what you thought of the material, and where could we improve, because it's clearly it morphed a fair bit even through the session.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think somewhere through the line, Andrew wrote continuous improvement. It might have been Jason. Somebody put continuous improvement in the chat, and I totally agree. Continuous improvement is one of the things which in all of simulation is vital, but in debriefing is imperative. Yeah. And thanks everyone for all your contributions. I hope we've entertained and maybe educated.
I think you have educated me, that's for sure. I think there's heaps I picked up on this one, and
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah. Anyone else got any things that they particularly wanted to sort of?
So Jason said thanks. It was interesting. Jason, please stay in touch. We'll be around. I think we're going to be trying to stay in touch with all the people who've been online over the last 3 days. Simulation Australasia's growing and got some big plans, and we need to engage with people and provide support and draw on you for support. So thanks, Todd. That's great. Always glad to be different. Yeah. Okay.
I think we're good. Thanks everyone. Enjoy and yeah, connect up, LinkedIn, all that sort of stuff, and
yes, please.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll see you at the closing shortly with Philip and the team.